Greetings, fellow fans. You're tuned into N.O. Harry, presenting to you today, what if Madam Pomfrey found 52 tracking charms after first flying lesson and Gringotts arrested Dumbledore for stalking? Show some love by liking and subscribing. Enjoy the story ahead. Chapter 1, The weight of invisible things. The sky over Hogwarts was the kind of grey that couldn't make up its mind, not quite stormy, not quite clear, just hanging there like a held breath while 11 first-years stood on the training grounds with broomsticks lined up at their feet and Madam Hooch staring them down like they'd already done something wrong. Harry hadn't flown before. He knew that in the same practical way he knew he'd never had a birthday cake or a bedroom with a door that locked from the inside. It was just a fact of his life before Hogwarts, filed away with all the other facts he'd stopped expecting to feel bad about. But standing there with the November cool air threading through his robes and the worn handle of the school broom within arm's reach, something in his chest did a funny sideways thing that he thought might be anticipation. Up, Madam Hooch said, demonstrating the correct posture with her own broom, and Harry said it too, quiet, almost to himself, and the broom snapped into his palm so fast it stung. He heard Hermione mutter something behind him. He heard Draco Malfoy across the row make a noise like he was irritated that someone had matched his broom's eagerness. Harry just wrapped his fingers around the handle and thought that his hand fit there, naturally, the way a door fits a frame. He didn't think about why. He'd learn, later, that magic recognizes itself. The lesson went the way it went. Neville panicked, his broom bucking upward before Hooch had given the signal, and he went up fast and uneven and came down hard off the side of the broom, hitting the grass with a sound that made everyone wince. His wrist was bent at an angle that meant it was broken, and Madam Hooch's whole demeanor shifted from instructor to healer in under a second. She had him gathered up and turned toward the castle before Neville had quite figured out he was being moved. "Nobody moves," she said, over her shoulder, her yellow hawk eyes sweeping across the remaining 10 students. "Nobody flies. Anyone who takes to the air before I return will find themselves out of Hogwarts before they can say Quidditch." Then Malfoy picked up Neville's remembrall. Harry had watched Malfoy for 7 weeks. He'd watched him in the corridors and at the Slytherin table and in potions where Snape let him get away with things that made the back of Harry's neck go hot. He'd formed opinions. He wasn't trying to be unfair about it, he'd genuinely given the boy a chance, right at the start, on the train. But Malfoy had a particular way of looking at other people that Harry recognized in his bones, the way you recognize a smell or a sound that means something is about to go wrong. Malfoy was looking at him like that now. "You know," Malfoy said, tossing the little glass sphere up and catching it with one hand, "I think I'll put this somewhere Longbottom will have to climb to get it." He glanced up at the castle with something theatrical in his expression. Maybe the roof. It wasn't even aimed at Harry. That was the thing. Malfoy was just doing it. Just exercising the particular muscle that he'd been allowed to exercise his whole life without consequence, the one that said I can take what I want and there's nothing you can do about it. Harry got on his broom. He heard Hermione's sharp inhale behind him. He heard Ron Weasley say something that was probably meant to be cautionary but came out excited. Harry didn't hear any of it clearly because the moment his feet left the ground the sound of everything went a little distant, replaced by wind and that loose, enormous feeling of up, and it was the most natural thing he'd ever done. He was good at this. He hadn't expected to know that so quickly, but he did. His body understood the broom the way it understood balance, the way it understood that a step was a certain length and a door handle was a certain height. He leveled off about 40 feet up and looked down at Malfoy's upturned face and felt nothing specific except clarity. "Give it back, Malfoy," he said. Malfoy threw the remembrall instead, hurling it up and away in a high arc, and Harry's body made the decision before his mind caught up. He was already tilting into the dive, already reading the curve of the thing's trajectory, already knowing exactly where it would be when he needed to be there. He came out of the dive 6 inches off the ground with the remembrall in his fist and a mouthful of wind, and Madam Hooch was standing at the edge of the grounds with Neville gone and an expression on her face that was somehow both horrified and impressed. Professor McGonagall appeared from somewhere near the castle door, striding across the grass with her robes snapping around her ankles, and she looked at Harry on the broom and Harry looked back at her and he thought, briefly, well, that's that, preparing himself for detention, for expulsion, but McGonagall turned to Madam Hooch and said something in a low voice, and then she looked at Harry again and said, crisply, Mr. Potter. Come with me. The other students watched him walk away. Malfoy's face was doing something complicated. Harry followed McGonagall into the castle without looking back. She took him to the Quidditch pitch, where Oliver Wood was waiting with an expression like someone had given him an unexpected birthday present, and Harry found out he was the new Gryffindor seeker in the time it took to walk from one end of the pitch to the other. He was given a Nimbus 2000 by end of day, a broom that fit his hand like the school broom had but better, like the difference between a borrowed coat and one cut for you, and Malfoy saw it in the corridor and went pale in a way that was deeply satisfying. It should have been a good day. It mostly was. Except that Harry noticed, walking back from the Ollery after sending a letter to nobody in particular, he just wanted to watch the owls, really, that his head ached. Not badly. Just a pressure behind his temples, low and persistent, like he was slightly too warm. He'd had it before, on and off, so often that he'd stopped cataloging it. He assumed it was stress, or the scar, or not drinking enough water, or any of the 100 small explanations he trained himself to accept because nobody had ever told him his body's complaints were worth investigating. He rubbed his temples, drank a glass of water at dinner, and went to bed. In the morning, his wrist was bruised. He didn't remember bruising his wrist. He turned it over in the early gray light of the dormitory, the other boys still asleep, looking at the faint greenish-yellow mark along the outside of his wrist bone. It wasn't from the dive yesterday. He'd caught the remembrall cleanly, both hands on the broom. He'd have noticed pain at the time. He noticed pain. He'd had enough practice at it. Ron sat up across the room, hair standing in 4 directions, and squinted at him. You all right? Fine, Harry said, pulling his sleeve down. Just thinking. You think loud, Ron said, and fell back onto his pillow, and Harry smiled despite himself and got up to get dressed. The bruise was what sent him to the hospital wing. Not because it hurt, it didn't, much, but because he couldn't explain it, and Harry had learned, in a practical and unsentimental way, that unexplained things were worth tracking down. Aunt Petunia had told him his whole life that strange things didn't happen to normal boys, said it like a warning, but he'd eventually understood that what she actually meant was strange things happen to you specifically and it frightens me so I'd like you to pretend they don't. He'd stopped pretending. Madam Pomfrey was already up. She was always already up, as far as Harry could tell, he wasn't sure the woman slept. She was adjusting the alignment of the beds with small, practiced motions when he came in, and she turned to look at him with the professional assessment of someone who has spent decades reading bodies for information. Mr. Potter, she said. Sit down. What is it? Bruised wrist, he said, hoisting himself onto the nearest bed and pushing his sleeve up. Don't remember doing it. She looked at the bruise with the focused attention of someone who finds it professionally offensive. She muttered a diagnostic charm, a low, lilting thing that left a brief shimmer of pale blue light around his wrist, and looked at the result and said, mild strain. Nothing serious. You've been overextending the joint, likely from the broom yesterday. Oh, Harry said. That made sense, actually. Hold still a moment, she said, because she was still looking at the shimmer, which hadn't faded entirely the way Harry supposed diagnostic charms usually did. It was sitting in the air around his wrist like it had caught on something. She made a small sound that wasn't quite a word. Is something wrong? Harry asked. Hold still, she said again, not urgently, but with a precision that told him she'd found something she wanted to look at more carefully. She pulled her wand and cast again, a different charm this time, longer, more complex, the syllables stacking up on each other in a way that made his ears feel slightly pressurized, and the shimmer expanded, and changed color, and Poppy Pomfrey's face did something Harry had never seen a face do before in his presence. She went absolutely, completely still. Not frozen. Not frightened. Still, In the way that very composed people go still when something has landed in their mind that they need a moment to properly contain. "Mr. Potter," she said, after approximately 5 seconds that felt considerably longer, "I need you to stay here. I'm going to run a full diagnostic." "Not because something is wrong," she added, and he'd have thought she was reassuring him, except her voice was too level for that. This was a woman managing information, not a woman being comforting, "but because I want to be thorough." "All right," Harry said, because that seemed reasonable. She ran the full diagnostic. It took about 8 minutes and involved 4 separate incantations, 3 of which Harry didn't recognize, one of which made the air around him glow a very faint, unpleasant orange. He sat on the bed and watched her face and waited. By the 4th charm, she wasn't still anymore. She was gripping her wand with both hands, which he was fairly sure wasn't standard procedure. "What is it?" he asked. She looked at him. There was something in her eyes that he couldn't read. It wasn't pity, he knew pity, and this wasn't it, something older and harder. "I'm going to be honest with you, Mr. Potter, because you deserve honesty and because you're going to know something is wrong regardless of what I tell you. I've found some magical anomalies in your aura. I need to investigate them properly before I can tell you what they mean. Is that acceptable to you?" Harry considered that. "Are they dangerous?" "I don't believe they represent an immediate physical danger," she said, which was a very careful answer. "Okay," he said. "Then yes. Do what you need to do." She cast the extended diagnostic again, and this time she talked him through what she was looking at, in the detached manner of someone dictating medical notes, not condescending, just precise. She showed him how diagnostic magic mapped a person's aura like a topography, peaks and valleys representing magical density, and she showed him how his should look, and she showed him how his actually looked. There were marks on it. Not injuries. Not damage, exactly. Marks like signatures, like stamps, small, layered, overlapping, a dozen of them visible at the surface level and more below. They sat in his aura like layers of sediment, each one distinct, and he could tell from the way she was counting under her breath that there were more than she'd expected. "I'm going to tell you a number," she said, "and I'd like you to not panic." "I never panic," Harry said, which was more or less true. "There are," Pomfrey said, and paused, and started again. "There are 52 distinct charms currently layered in your magical signature. Some of them are tracking charms. Some are monitoring charms. Several are what we call mood-modifying passive enchantments, which affect disposition and emotional response in subtle ways. And there are at least 3 that I believe to be compulsion charms." She looked at him directly. "Some of them have been there since you were approximately 15 months old." Harry sat with that for a moment. The room was very quiet. Morning light was coming through the high windows, catching dust motes and making them look like small suspended stars. He could hear, distantly, the sounds of the castle beginning its day, the clatter of house elves somewhere below, the first distant voices of students heading to breakfast. "So," he said, "someone's been watching me." "Yes. And steering me." "The compulsion charms are low level," she said carefully. "They wouldn't override your free will outright. But they would, bias. Encourage certain responses. Suppress others." "Like what responses?" She hesitated. "Compliance. Reduced aggression toward authority. Suppression of what might be categorized as territorial instincts, instincts that would cause you to question your circumstances or push back against them." Harry looked at his hands for a moment. "So the reason I didn't fight back harder against my aunt and uncle, I can't say that definitively," she said. "But it might be." "Yes," she said. "It might be." He thought about all the times he'd swallowed something down. All the times he'd looked at something wrong, the cupboard, the hand-me-down clothes, the way Dudley was given everything and he was given nothing, and felt not the hot surge he'd have expected but a kind of grey acceptance. He'd always attributed that to just who he was. How he was wired. He'd thought he was someone who endured things. Maybe he was. Maybe he would have been anyway. But maybe someone had helped him along. He noticed he wasn't shaking. He noticed he wasn't breathing faster. He was sitting very straight on the hospital bed, and his magic was doing something he couldn't quite name. It was present, somehow, more than usual, pressing lightly against the inside of his skin like it had something to say. What happens if they're removed? He asked. Your magic should return to its natural state. The compulsion effects would cease. The monitoring and tracking, whoever holds the anchoring objects would lose their connection to your signature. Who put them there? She hesitated again, and this one was longer, and he got the sense she was making a decision. Several bear magical signatures I don't recognize. Some are standard ministry-issue monitoring charms, the type placed on all magical children, those are legal and expected. But others, she stopped. Madam Pomfrey, Harry said quietly. You can tell me. Several bear a specific signature that is very well known in this school, she said. I'll need a specialist to confirm it before I can make any formal accusation. But I have a strong preliminary assessment. Dumbledore, Harry said. It wasn't really a question. The word just sat there. Her silence confirmed it. Harry nodded slowly. He felt something that was not quite anger, not yet, it was more like the moment before anger, the moment of recognition, the clearing of the air that happens when you realize the shape of something you've been living inside of without knowing what it was. He'd trusted Dumbledore. Not easily, he didn't trust easily, but genuinely, in the way you trust a lighthouse because it's bright and tall and seems to know where the rocks are. But a lighthouse that also built the rocks had a different character entirely. What can we do? He said. I can remove several of the surface-level charms now, Pomfrey said. The ones that are safely isolated, the tracking charms in particular. The deeper ones, especially the compulsion charms, require a specialist to ensure removal doesn't cause magical rebound. I want Gringotts cursebreakers. She paused. They have legal authority over cases of magical violation, Mr. Potter. Independent of the ministry. Independent of, she gestured, slightly, toward the ceiling of the castle. Everything here. Do it, Harry said. Remove the ones you can, and contact Gringotts. You're 11 years old, she said, not as an objection, just noting it. Old enough to consent to my own medical treatment, he said, and found that he meant it completely, and found that she seemed to find this entirely satisfactory. Yes, she said. You are. She removed 3 of the surface-level tracking charms. It was not painful. It was the opposite of painful, it was like the moment when you've had a song stuck in your head for so long you stopped hearing it, and then it stops, and the silence where it was is remarkable. Harry didn't hear anything, exactly, but he felt it, a very small but very real sense of something lifting, 3 places in his aura where there had been weight and now weren't. His magic moved. He'd always felt his magic as a kind of pressure, ambient and ungoverned, something that had to be carefully not done. He'd spent 10 years learning not to let it out because the times it had come out on its own had resulted in bad things. He'd arrived at Hogwarts and been taught that you had to direct it carefully, precisely, through a wand and a word. What happened in the moment the 3 charms were removed was not a direction. It was more like a stretch, the way a muscle releases after long tension, and for approximately 3 seconds the air in the hospital wing smelled like rain and ozone and something green and sharp, and 2 of the potted plants on the windowsill put out small new leaves. Pomfrey observed this with the expression of someone whose preliminary assessment has been confirmed at a higher magnitude than anticipated. Right, she said, quietly. I'll be writing to Gringotts today. Harry looked at the plants. The leaves were very small and very bright. Good, he said. She gave him a bruise paste for his wrist and told him to go to breakfast and come back after last lesson. She asked if he wanted her to tell him anything further before he'd had time to process what she'd already told him, and he said no, that he needed to sit with it first. She nodded, and he left, and the door swung closed behind him. He stood in the corridor for a moment, outside the hospital wing, in the flow of students beginning to move toward the great hall, and he was aware of all of them the way you're aware of weather, present, notable, not specifically directed at him. He was also aware of himself in a way he hadn't been before, or maybe more precisely than before, the way you become aware of a tooth only when it stops aching. He felt more. It wasn't a comfortable more, necessarily. It was large, and it needed time, and he wasn't sure what to do with it yet. But it was his, and the fact of its belonging to him entirely was something he thought he could stand to examine. Ron found him at the entrance to the Great Hall with a piece of toast in one hand and an expression of mild confusion. "Where were you?" "Neville said he saw you go to the hospital wing at like 6 in the morning. You're not hurt, are you?" "Fine," Harry said, and glanced at Ron's toast. "Is there more of that?" "Obviously," Ron said, already turning toward the Gryffindor table. "Come on, before Seamus eats everything that isn't bolted down." Harry followed him in. The Great Hall was its usual spectacular morning self, high enchanted ceiling showing that same indecisive grey sky, for long tables packed with students in various states of wakefulness, the smell of bacon and toast and tea threading through the air. He took his seat and loaded a plate and ate steadily, and across the table Hermione looked at him over the top of a very large book and said, "You did the dive yourself?" "Without instruction." "Good morning to you too," Harry said. "Madam Hooch was impressed and horrified in equal measure," Hermione said. "I looked it up. Youngest seeker in a century." "I know," Harry said. "In about 100 years," she persisted. "Hermione," Ron said, "he knows." She lowered her book slightly and looked at Harry with the particular focused attention that meant she was reading him rather than the book. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," Harry said. "Had something checked at the hospital wing." "Nothing serious." Her eyes narrowed in the way they did when she suspected a sentence was technically true and contextually incomplete. He expected her to push, but she looked back at her book, and he thought that was actually one of the things he liked about her. She had good instincts about when to wait. He ate his bacon and watched the high table. Dumbledore was there, eating porridge, speaking in a low voice to Professor Sprout about something. He looked like what he appeared to be, a serene old man in magnificent robes, blue eyes kind behind his half-moon glasses, long silver beard impeccably maintained. He looked like wisdom. He looked like the sort of person you trust with anything. Harry was 11 years old and he'd already learned that was exactly the kind of person to be most careful about. He looked away before Dumbledore could glance in his direction, and applied himself to his scrambled eggs. Double transfiguration that morning. McGonagall was brisk and demanding in her usual fashion, which Harry found oddly comforting. She expected you to do the work, she expected you to fail at it a few times, and she told you plainly which of those things was happening without drama. Today they were working on turning beetles into buttons, which was fiddly in a way that required concentration, and he found that the concentration was actually useful. It gave him somewhere to put the morning's information while he processed it. He turned the beetle. It looked at him with small shiny eyes and he looked back at it and then said the incantation and it became a button, cleanly, on the first attempt. He turned the next one. Also a button. He turned a third and by then McGonagall had noticed and come to stand behind him, and he felt her pause in a way that had a particular quality to it. He turned and found her looking at the 3 buttons with an expression that was something between proud and unsettled. "First attempt, Mr. Potter." "Yes, Professor." "All 3." "Yes, Professor." She looked at him for a moment that was slightly longer than the ones she gave other students. 10 points to Gryffindor, she said. "Try the 4th with a different angle of approach, you'll find the second syllable requires more emphasis than the first." He tried the 4th the way she said. It worked. He thought, not for the first time, that McGonagall gave you the exactly right amount of information and then got out of the way, and that was actually a rare quality in a teacher. Across the room, Hermione was on her 3rd beetle, brow furrowed, wand moving with precise determination. Ron's beetle had become something that was halfway between beetle and button and looked confused about it. Seamus had managed to make his beetle larger. Harry turned 2 more beetles to buttons and then stopped, because he had the sense that turning all of them would draw more attention than he currently wanted, and also because he could feel, even now, something that he hadn't felt before, a sort of clarity in his magic, or responsiveness. The 3 removed charms had been such a small fraction of the total, but even so, even just that tiny reduction of the cage, and things worked differently. Better. Faster. Like a lens had been cleaned. He wondered what it would feel like when all 52 were gone. He thought it might feel like being born. He ate lunch in a distracted state that he disguised reasonably well by asking Ron questions about Quidditch rules. Ron could talk about Quidditch for approximately 6 hours without requiring much input, which was ideal. Through the window at the end of the Gryffindor table Harry could see the Ollery, and he wondered if Pomfrey was writing the letter now, if an owl was already winging its way to London, to the tall white building that leaned backwards and housed everything of monetary and legal significance in the magical world. He'd been to Gringotts once, on his birthday with Hagrid, and he'd found it impressive in a way that wasn't exactly friendly. It was impressive like a glacier was impressive, or a court of law. Unyielding. Precise. Not particularly interested in whether you liked it. He thought, now, that those were actually ideal qualities for what was needed. History of magic after lunch was bins being bins, his voice a steady drone from which very little information escaped into the actual minds of students. Harry spent most of it writing notes to himself in the margin of his notebook, not notes about goblin rebellions, but a kind of inventory, trying to write down what he actually knew versus what he thought he knew versus what he'd assumed. 3 columns. The what he knew column was shorter than he'd like. He knew he had 52 charms. He knew some were tracking, some monitoring, some compulsion. He knew at least some bore Dumbledore's magical signature. He knew they'd started at 15 months. The what he thought he knew column was longer and messier. He suspected, that the compulsion charms were why he'd been so accepting of the Dursleys' treatment. He suspected that some of the monitoring charms explained why Dumbledore had always seemed to know things he shouldn't know. He suspected the financial theft Pomfrey had not mentioned yet but which he'd have to look into, because if someone had the audacity to monitor him this thoroughly, he doubted they'd left his vaults untouched. The what he assumed column he left blank. He'd had enough of assumptions. They were another kind of cage. Potions that afternoon was Snape, and Snape was Snape. The dungeon cold and the torches too low and the man himself moving between tables with the quality of something finding fault for pleasure. He paused behind Harry for a very long moment and said nothing, which was worse than when he said something, and Harry kept his eyes on his cauldron and his work precise and gave him nothing to work with. The swelling solution behaved itself. Harry's batch came out the correct shade of orange at the end of the lesson, and Snape marked it without comment, which was Snape's version of approval. Harry thought, walking out of the dungeons, about Pomfrey's careful words. Several bear a specific signature. Several. Not one. Not a couple. Several. And she'd pause before she said it. He thought about the way Snape looked at him sometimes, not the contempt, which was legible and even honest in its own way, but something underneath it. Something that watched. Something that knew his face too well for what a first-year's potions professor should know. He filed it away. The day's last lesson was defense against the dark arts, which was Quirrell in his turban and his slight persistent smell of garlic, stammering through the theory of a knockback jinx with a nervousness that Harry had always found oddly inconsistent. Quirrell was nervous the way someone was nervous about something other than what they claimed to be nervous about, a secondary nervousness, surface level, while beneath it something else was entirely still and watchful. Harry sat in the back row and participated enough not to draw attention and watched Quirrell the way he'd learned to watch people, with the peripheral part of his attention, not the direct part, because people behaved differently when they knew they were being observed. Quirrell was watching him back. He was careful about it. Very careful. But twice in the hour Harry caught the edge of a look turned in his direction that was not a teacher's look, not an instructor's idle attention check on a student. It was something more specific. More interested. Harry had had a lifetime of adults being interested in him for reasons that weren't about him. He recognized the flavor of it. He walked back to Gryffindor Tower with Ron and Hermione, listening to Ron's breakdown of how he'd managed to overinflate the frog in charms. Nobody could explain how the Wingardium Leviosa charm had resulted in this, but here they were, and Hermione's response to this, which was to explain exactly how it had happened in technical detail, and the comfortable back and forth of it settled something in him. He liked them. He'd not had people to like before, not really. He'd had Dudley, who wasn't a person to like so much as a person to survive. He'd had teachers who were kind in the absent way of teachers who have many students and not enough time. But Ron and Hermione were his, in some way he didn't have good language for yet, and he was theirs, and the mutualness of that was new enough that he was still learning to trust it. He thought about the compulsion charms. About compliance. About suppression of territorial instincts. He thought about how, even with 3 of 52 removed, he'd caught 3 beetles on the first attempt where yesterday he'd needed 2 tries and yesterday he'd needed the incantation out loud where today he'd barely whispered it. He thought about what he might be capable of, actually capable of, when the cage was fully open. The portrait hole opened. The common room was warm and loud and firelit. Someone had won a game of exploding snap and the explosion had apparently taken most of a table with it, if the singed wood smell was any indication. Harry sat down in one of the chairs nearest the fire and held his hands out toward the warmth and felt, quietly, the thing he'd been feeling all day. Not anger, exactly. Not yet. That would come, probably, when he had more information, when the full audit came back, when he had names and dates and amounts and specifics. Right now it was more like the deep, settling conviction that something was going to change, that he was going to change it, and that no one, not a headmaster, not a charm, not the accumulated weight of 11 years of careful management, was going to stop him. Ron dropped into the chair next to him with a biscuit. "You've got that look again," he said. "What look?" "The one like you're planning something." "I'm always planning something," Harry said, which was new, which was different, which was him, actually, without the part that had been quietly told to think small. "Brilliant," Ron said, with great satisfaction, and offered him a biscuit. He took it. The fire popped and settled. Above them the portrait of the fat lady hummed something to herself. Outside the windows, the sky had finally made up its mind. It was raining now, properly, the sound of it against the stone like something constant and determined and entirely without apology. Pomfrey's owl left Hogwarts at 9:45 that night, heading south through the rain, carrying a sealed letter written on the hospital wing's official parchment in her precise, no-nonsense hand. The letter had 2 enclosures, a full magical diagnostic of one Harry James Potter, age 11, student of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, and a formal request under the International Goblin Accords for investigation of magical violation. At the bottom, in her clean, practiced script, she had noted, "The individual in question is a minor. The charms in question represent ongoing and systematic violation of his magical autonomy. I am requesting immediate attendance of Gringotts cursebreakers, and I am requesting, further, that the relevant investigative protocols be initiated without delay." She'd added, after a moment's pause with the quill hovering, one final line, "He is an 11-year-old boy and he was calm. That, I think, is the most disturbing thing I have found today." She'd sealed it, given it to her most reliable owl, and then sat for a long time at her desk in the quiet of the hospital wing, looking at the diagnostic results still spread before her on her desk, and feeling the particular kind of fury that comes from knowing something has been very wrong for a very long time and nobody stopped it. She was not going to be the person who didn't stop it. She brewed herself a cup of chamomile tea and went back to work, and through the window behind her the owl became a small dark shape in the rain and then was gone. Chapter 2, What the Goblins Know. They arrived at 7 in the morning. Harry knew something was different before he'd reached the bottom of the stairs from the dormitory, because the castle sounded different, not louder, not quieter, but tighter, the way sound gets when people are being deliberately careful about making it. He came down into the common room and found it half full of Gryffindors in various states of morning preparation, all of them aimed at the windows or whispering to each other with the particular intensity of people who have seen something they don't quite know how to categorize. Ron appeared at his elbow. "There are goblins at the front gate," he said, without preamble, with the tone of someone reporting something they are still processing. 4 of them. In robes. With briefcases. Briefcases? Seamus said, from across the room. Official ones, Ron said. With the Gringotts seal. Harry said nothing. He pulled his robe straight and tucked his wand into his pocket and said, "I'm going to breakfast," and went, and Ron followed because Ron was becoming someone who followed Harry into things, and Hermione joined them on the second-floor landing because she had apparently been awake since 5 reading about something and had information, which she always had. "Gringotts Cursebreakers," she said, falling into step on Harry's left side, book closed under her arm. "I heard the commotion and looked it up. Under the International Goblin Accords of 1711, Gringotts maintains independent legal jurisdiction over cases of magical theft, magical binding without consent, and violation of a person's magical signature. They can enter any property, including ministry-sanctioned buildings, if they've been issued an investigation warrant." "Including Hogwarts?" Ron said. "Including Hogwarts," Hermione said, and looked at Harry in that careful way she had, the one that meant she had a question but was deciding whether to ask it. "Later," Harry said quietly. She nodded. They went to breakfast. The Great Hall was buzzing with it. Word had spread the way it always spread at Hogwarts, instantaneously and with embellishments, so by the time Harry sat down at the Gryffindor table the version of events circulating was that there were either 4 goblins or 11, that they were either here to audit the school's finances or arrest someone. Nobody had a specific name, but several people thought it was Filch, and that McGonagall had gone to the gate personally, which either meant it was serious or completely routine depending on who was telling the story. Harry ate toast and watched the high table. Dumbledore was eating porridge. He looked serene and unhurried in the way he always looked, long-fingered hands wrapped around his bowl, occasionally exchanging pleasantries with Professor Flitwick to his right. Nothing in his bearing suggested a man who was aware that 4 Gringotts officials were currently at the gate of his school with an investigation warrant. But his eyes, once, moved across the room to the Gryffindor table, and found Harry, and held for a fraction of a second longer than a headmaster casually surveying his students. Harry looked back. Level and calm and completely without deference, which was new, which was something the 3 removed charms had apparently been helping to prevent, because before yesterday morning he would have looked down almost automatically, some ingrained instinct that reframed Dumbledore's gaze as something to defer to. Now it just felt like 2 people looking at each other. Dumbledore broke the look first, pleasantly, as if nothing had happened, and returned to his porridge. Harry drank his pumpkin juice. The summons came before he'd finished breakfast, a second-year Gryffindor prefect materializing at Harry's elbow with the slightly nervous expression of someone delivering a message they don't fully understand. "Headmistress, I mean Professor McGonagall wants you," the prefect said. "Hospital wing." "Thank you," Harry said, stood up, and looked at Ron and Hermione. Hermione was already on her feet. Ron had a piece of toast in his mouth and his bag over his shoulder, which counted as ready. "You might want to come alone," the prefect said, uncertainly. "They're fine," Harry said, and walked. The hospital wing at 7:30 in the morning was not its usual empty self. Pomfrey was there, standing very straight near the window in the manner of someone who has been standing straight for a while and intends to continue. McGonagall was there, and her expression, Harry read it quickly, cataloguing it, was controlled, professionally neutral, but underneath that there was something working, something that she was managing with effort. She looked like someone who had been given information that required her to reconsider several things simultaneously. And the goblins were there. 4 of them, as Ron had reported, and they were not what Harry had expected, which meant he needed to revise his expectations. He'd met goblins once, briefly, on his first visit to Gringotts with Hagrid, and they'd been the background of the experience, the tellers behind the counters, the drivers of the mine carts, the peripheral professional faces of a place that was more interested in gold than in people. These 4 were different. They occupied the space differently. They were wearing robes that were immaculate and dark, cut with a severity that made formal human robes look fussy, and they carried the briefcases Ron had mentioned, but the briefcases were not financial ledgers, they were diagnostic equipment. Harry could tell from the faint magical hum coming off the nearest one, a resonance that his newly cleaned magic registered like a tuning fork. The one at the front was the oldest, with deep-set eyes the color of river stones and hands that were absolutely still in a way that suggested profound patience of the deliberate kind. He looked at Harry when Harry walked in, and his look was the same as his posture, completely level, completely without sentimentality. "Mr. Potter," he said. His voice was low and precise, the accent of it something old and particular. "I am Ragnarok, Chief Cursebreaker, Western Division. These are my colleagues." He didn't introduce them individually. He indicated them with a slight motion. "We received Madam Pomfrey's communication last night. I want to be straightforward with you. We are not here at the request of the Ministry. We are not here at the request of Hogwarts or its headmaster. We are here because a credible report of systematic magical violation has been filed, and under the Accords, we are the appropriate authority." "I know," Harry said. "Thank you for coming quickly." Ragnarok looked at him with the particular attention of someone recalibrating. "You were informed of our authority?" "Hermione told me on the way down," Harry said. Hermione looked pleased in the way she looked when something she'd researched turned out to be immediately applicable. Ron was looking at the goblins with the wide-eyed expression of someone trying very hard to be cool about something impressive and not entirely succeeding. "Mr. Weasley," McGonagall said. "Miss Granger, they stay," Harry said. Not rudely. Just clearly. "They're my friends and I want them here." McGonagall opened her mouth and then closed it and looked at him for a beat and seemed to arrive at a decision. "Very well." Ragnarok had not reacted to the exchange at all. He simply waited until it was resolved and then continued. "We will be conducting a full forensic audit of your magical signature, Mr. Potter. This is more comprehensive than what Madam Pomfrey was able to perform. It will identify every charm, every enchantment, every modification that has been made to your magical aura, from birth to present. It will identify the caster's signature for each one where that signature is available. It will generate a legal record." He paused. "Do you consent to this?" "Yes," Harry said. "Explicitly and of your own free will, without coercion or pressure from any party?" Harry almost smiled. "Explicitly and of my own free will." One of the other goblins opened a briefcase. The equipment that came out of it was unlike anything Harry had seen in his Hogwarts classes, not wand-based, not incantation-based, more like instruments, precise and crystalline, that resonated with magic rather than producing it. They arranged these in a semicircle around the hospital bed nearest the window and indicated that Harry should sit. He sat. Ron drifted to stand next to Hermione near the wall. McGonagall stood with her arms folded and her face unreadable. Pomfrey remained by the window, and her stillness had a quality of relief, Harry thought. That someone else was now carrying the authority of this. Ragnarok lifted what looked like a tuning fork made of something that wasn't quite metal and struck it once, silently, against the edge of the briefcase. The sound it produced was below hearing but above nothing. It moved through the room the way a wave moves through water, and where it touched Harry's aura, it left a trace. A map, building itself in the air beside him in layers of pale light, like a cross-section of something that had been growing for a long time. The map took 4 minutes to fully render. Nobody spoke during those 4 minutes. Harry watched it build. He had no way to read it yet, it was in goblin notation, which he didn't know, but the shape of it was legible enough. His magical signature should have been clean, like a fingerprint, clear and complex and uniquely his. It was that, but it was also cluttered. The word wasn't quite right. Inhabited. His aura was inhabited, the way a house becomes inhabited when people have been living in it without your knowledge, leaving behind furniture and objects and the particular residue of presence. When the map finished, Ragnarok studied it for a long moment, and the 3 cursebreakers behind him studied it, and the quality of their shared silence shifted in a way that Harry registered as significant. 54, said one of the cursebreakers, younger, sharper-faced, clearly precise in the way that people who work with very fine measurements are precise. Madam Pomfrey found 52, McGonagall said, and her voice was careful. She found 52 active surface layer enchantments, the Cursebreaker said, without condescension, just correcting a unit of measurement. 2 more are deep layer dormant triggers. They would have activated at specific thresholds, certain levels of magical expression, certain emotional states, and modified his behavior accordingly. What thresholds? Hermione said, and then checked herself. Sorry, it's a relevant question, Ragnarok said. One is triggered by sustained high magical output, it would have created a reflexive aversion to full magical expression. The other is triggered by what the caster designated as inappropriate ambition. He said the phrase with the flat quality of someone quoting something they find professionally distasteful. Harry sat with that for a moment. Inappropriate ambition. A charm that would have suppressed it. Fired off like a trap whenever he thought too big, reached too far, started to understand what he actually was. Who placed them? He asked. Ragnarok turned back to the map. He picked up a slender instrument and used it to trace the signature markers on the chart, each one highlighted as he touched it, different colors for different casters. Some of these are standard ministry monitoring charms, placed on all registered magical children as of birth. Those are legal, transparent, and not our concern. The remaining 41 non-standard enchantments have 7 distinct caster signatures. He paused. The largest cluster, 23 charms in total, bears a signature registered in our records to Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore. The room was absolutely quiet. Harry heard Ron's sharp inhale. He heard Hermione's measured exhale, the kind that meant she'd already been expecting this and was managing the confirmation of it. He heard McGonagall make no sound at all, which was the loudest thing in the room. The second largest cluster, 9 charms, bears a signature registered to the vault account of one Severus Tobias Snape, Ragnarok continued. McGonagall made a sound then. Very small and very controlled, but it was there. 5 charms bear the signature of a caster registered only by vault number, Ragnarok said, whose identity we will establish through standard investigative procedure. 4 bear a signature registered to Petunia Evans Dursley. The remaining are unclaimed with degraded signatures, likely date from early infancy, origin unclear. My aunt, Harry said. Petunia Dursley. Yes. He thought about Aunt Petunia, who hated magic, who had denied magic, who had raised him in deliberate, furious ignorance of everything he was. Aunt Petunia, who had somehow known enough about magical charms to place 4 of them on an infant nephew. Who had either known how to do it herself, which was impossible, she was a muggle, or had been given them by someone who did. What did the Dursley charms do? Harry asked. 3 are suppression charms, targeted at the spontaneous magic of young children. 1 is a mood modification, specifically targeted at what is labeled in the charm's notation as self-esteem. Ragnarok said this in the same even tone he'd used for everything else, but Harry noticed that the younger Cursebreaker had gone very still. It would have created a persistent state of reduced self-worth. Reduced self-worth. Placed on an infant. Ron said, in a voice Harry had never heard from him before, quiet and absolutely flat, someone put a self-esteem charm on a baby. Yes, Ragnarok said. Harry felt something then that wasn't clean anger, wasn't the bright cold clarity of the morning before, this was older, and it went down further, and it had dimensions he'd need to excavate for years probably. He put it somewhere internal and careful and deliberate, the way you put something fragile in a safe place when you don't have time to deal with it but know it needs to be dealt with, and he said, steadily, and the financial audit? A pause. Ragnarok exchanged a look with one of his colleagues, a specific look, the kind that carries prior conversation. Madam Pomfrey did not request a financial audit. I'm requesting it now, Harry said. If someone had access to my magical signature since I was 15 months old, they had access to my vaults. I want to know what's in them and what should be in them. You are entitled to a full accounting, Ragnarok said. This will take time to prepare properly. I will arrange for your presence at Gringotts at the earliest suitable date. What's in my vaults right now? Harry said. Not the full accounting. Just, what's there? Ragnarok produced a ledger from his briefcase. He did not appear to find the request unusual or excessive. Your trust vault, established at your birth, currently holds approximately 8,000 galleons. Your primary inheritance vault, the Potter family vault, is sealed under a timed inheritance lock that will fully transfer to you at age 17. He paused with just the weight of a considered breath. The trust vault was opened 4 times in the 10 years between your parents' deaths and your entrance to Hogwarts. Withdrawals totaling approximately 20,000 galleons were made across those 4 visits. All 4 visits were conducted by Albus Dumbledore. Harry heard Hermione pull in a breath. He heard Ron say something under his breath that his mother would not have approved of. He heard McGonagall's chair scrape very slightly against the stone floor. Harry looked at the ledger and then looked at Ragnarok and said, 20,000 galleons. Yes. Without my knowledge. Without your knowledge, your consent, or, given your age at the time of the withdrawals, any legal proxy authorization that we can find in our records. The withdrawals were made on the basis of a guardianship claim, but no formal guardianship was ever registered with either Gringotts or the Ministry. So they were unauthorized, Harry said. In our professional assessment, Ragnarok said, yes. They were theft. Harry nodded. He felt very clear. This was the word he kept coming back to, clear, like the inside of his head had been slightly blurred for years, the way a window fogs up in cold weather, and this morning the fog was coming off it and the view beyond was very sharp and very detailed. What's the process from here? He asked. For the charms. For the financial investigation. For, he paused, choosing the word, accountability. Ragnarok closed the ledger with a precise motion. The charm removal should be completed by a qualified cursebreaker, which I will arrange. Full removal is a process. Some charms are layered and removing the outer ones first is necessary for safe access to the inner ones. We would recommend 3 sessions. The full financial audit will take approximately 2 weeks. The accountability process, he looked at Harry. That depends on how far you wish to take this. How far can I take it? Harry said. Under the Accords, a warrant for arrest can be issued for any individual found to have placed illegal enchantments on another person's magical signature without consent. This warrant operates independently of the Ministry of Magic's authority. It is executed by Gringotts enforcement officers and the individual is held for formal hearing before the Wizengamot. Can you issue one for Dumbledore? Harry said. The room went completely still in a different way than it had been still before. This was the stillness of a held breath. We can, Ragnarok said. We will need 24 hours to complete the forensic signature confirmation to the legal standard required. After that, he paused. Yes. We can issue the warrant. Then do it, Harry said. McGonagall said, Mr. Potter, and then stopped. Harry looked at her. She was standing very straight, both hands flat on the surface of the bed she'd been sitting near, and her face had the quality of someone standing at a place where 2 roads meet and both of them are difficult. She looked at him with something that was not quite distress and not quite relief but lived in the vicinity of both. Professor, he said, 23 of those charms are his. Some of them have been on me since I was 15 months old. He took 20,000 galleons from my vault without authorization. He placed compulsion charms on an infant. He paused. I'm not angry at you. But I'm not going to be talked out of this. Her jaw moved. Her eyes were bright. She said, I'm not trying to talk you out of it, and the steadiness of her voice cost her something. I'm trying to, she stopped. I didn't know, she said, quietly. I know, Harry said. I should have, you didn't know, he said again. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, or maybe it was, but either way it was genuine and she received it like something that mattered. We can talk about all of that later. Right now I want the warrant issued. Ragnarok made a note. 24 hours, he said. In the meantime, I will assign a curse breaker to begin the removal process. Your first session can be this afternoon if you are available. I'll clear his schedule, Pomfrey said, from the window, and her voice was the most satisfied Harry had heard it. The goblins packed their equipment with swift, economical movements and filed toward the door. Ragnarok stopped at the threshold and turned back. One more thing, Mr. Potter. The forensic audit also identified a secondary effect that we occasionally see in cases of long-term suppression. When charms of this type are removed, particularly the deeper compulsion enchantments, there is sometimes a period of adjustment. Your magic will normalize, but the process is not always smooth. There may be outbursts. Spontaneous manifestations. We recommend avoiding confrontational situations until the removal is complete. I'll try, Harry said. Ragnarok looked at him. We've said our piece, he said, which was not exactly advice and not exactly acknowledgement but was goblin for we hear you, and left. The door closed. Pomfrey let out a breath. McGonagall sat down, which was not something she did often or lightly, and pressed the tips of her fingers together. Ron and Hermione looked at Harry with the same expression, different flavors of the same thing, a kind of heightened attention that wasn't concern exactly, more like they were making sure he was real. Are you all right? Hermione said. Yes, Harry said. I'm genuinely all right. He stood up from the bed and straightened his robes. They took 20,000 galleons. Harry, I'm fine, he said, and meant it in a different way than he'd meant it before, in the corridors and common rooms where fine was a word you said to close a conversation. This was fine as in I have processed this and I know what I'm doing with it. I need to go to class. I need to go to potions and look Snape in the eye and know what I know, and I need to do that without showing any of it. 9 charms, Ron said, quietly. He was still in the back of the room, shoulders slightly hunched, his hands in his pockets. Snape put 9 of them on you. Yes. Blimey, Harry. Yeah. Ron looked at the floor for a moment and then at Harry and said, What can I do? It was a simple question and it meant a lot. Harry looked at him, this tall, slightly gangly boy who had 2 older brothers who would be horrified and a mother who would be devastated and a whole family built on Dumbledore being a fixed and benevolent star in the sky, and who was standing in this room asking what can I do, and felt something warm and real and complicated. Don't tell anyone yet, Harry said. The warrant comes out tomorrow. After that, everyone will know. Until then, just, be normal. I can do normal, Ron said, which was generous of him given that the entire morning had been spectacularly abnormal. Hermione had been quiet for the past few minutes, which with Hermione meant she was thinking at considerable speed. She said, the vault number. The unidentified caster. I noticed that too, Harry said. Who has an interest in you that they'd want hidden even from Gringotts records? Someone with enough power or resources to register a vault anonymously, Harry said. Someone who'd know what was done to me and want a piece of it. He paused. Or someone who was doing me a different kind of harm entirely. Voldemort? Ron said, then flinched at the name and then, catching Harry's mild look, straightened up. Voldemort, he said again, more deliberately. Maybe, Harry said. Or someone who works for him. Or someone who works alongside Dumbledore and isn't quite Dumbledore. There are multiple options. We should find out, Hermione said. Gringotts is already on it, Harry said. Let them work. That's what they're good at. He picked up his bag from where he'd dropped it near the door. Come on. We've got charms in 10 minutes. He left the hospital wing and walked down the corridor toward the stairs, and the castle felt the same around him, same stone, same portraits, same morning light coming through the east windows in long dusty angles, but he felt different in it. Like the ratio between him and the world had shifted in some small but important way. Like he was taking up the right amount of space. Flitwick's charms class was cheerful and exacting in equal measure, and Harry worked with the focused enjoyment of someone whose concentration is not being quietly taxed by compulsion charms, and when Flitwick demonstrated the color change charm, Harry had his quills cycling through 7 colors before Flitwick had finished the explanation, and the small professor looked at him with wide bright eyes and said nothing, just noted something in his register with an expression of private delight. Between charms and transfiguration, in the corridor, Draco Malfoy appeared. He appeared the way he always appeared, with Crabbe and Goyle slightly behind him, with the particular spatial arrangement of someone who has always been told his presence requires management. He looked at Harry with the smirk that was his resting expression. "I heard goblins came to the school this morning," Malfoy said. "Something about you, Potter?" "Could be," Harry said, not slowing down. "Goblins don't come to Hogwarts," Malfoy said. "Something big must have happened. Something wrong with you, maybe. Or something wrong with someone near me," Harry said pleasantly, and kept walking. Malfoy's smirk flickered. He said something else but Harry was already past him, and the thing about Malfoy's attempts at unsettling him was that they relied on a particular emotional landscape that no longer quite existed in Harry in the same way. Before, there'd been a low-level anxiety to Malfoy's provocations, a response that felt involuntary, an activation of something that wanted to look away or placate. Now there was just clarity. Malfoy was a boy who needed to be the biggest thing in a room, and Harry had stopped being a room that wanted to be filled. Potions. The dungeon. The torchlight. The smell of something sulphurous from a third-year class that had come before them and left it behind. Snape moving between the benches with that particular quality of physical precision that he had, robes barely moving, each step placed exactly. Harry took his seat and set up his cauldron and looked at Snape, and Snape looked at him. 9 charms. Snape's face gave nothing. It never gave anything, which was a different kind of information. A face that gave nothing was a face that had things to give and had learned to give none of them. Harry looked at him and thought about what it would take to place 9 charms on a child you claimed to despise. Thought about the deliberateness of that. 9 was not an accidental number. 9 was a campaign. But why? That was the question. Dumbledore's reasons were legible, if monstrous: control, management, shaping a weapon into the right shape for the right moment. Snape's reasons were less clear, and the less clear thing nagged at him more than the clear thing, because unclear things could be either worse or, occasionally, something else entirely. "Mr. Potter," Snape said, coming to stand behind him, "your cauldron needs a quarter turn clockwise before you add the flobberworm mucus." Harry turned the cauldron a quarter turn clockwise. He did not look at Snape. He added the flobberworm mucus at the correct rate and the potion turned the required shade of pale green. Snape looked at it for a moment longer than necessary and moved on. Harry stared at the pale green potion and thought about what you did with information you couldn't use yet, and concluded that you kept it exactly where it was, precise and still and ready, the way Ragnarok had kept his hands still, not immobile, just ready. Lunch was where things started to fray at the edges of his careful composure, because Neville sat across from him with a look of guilty uncertainty and said, "I heard something happened this morning." "Something big." With you." He said it in a low voice, pulling at the sleeve of his robe, the way he always pulled at things when he was nervous. Harry looked at him. Neville Longbottom was someone Harry had been watching for reasons he couldn't fully articulate. There was something in Neville that he recognized in the same half-felt way that his broom had recognized his hand. A kind of kinship. Someone who had been told they were less than what they were for long enough that they'd started to believe it. "Yes," Harry said. "Something big happened. I'll tell you about it when I can." Neville nodded, still pulling his sleeve. "Are you in trouble?" "No," Harry said. "But someone else might be." Neville thought about that. "Okay," he said, and straightened up a bit, and started on his soup. The afternoon passed with a particular quality of suspension: history, defense, free period. In the free period Harry sat in the library with Hermione and they looked up the Goblin Accords together because it seemed like important background information to have, and Harry took careful notes in the margin of his charms notebook because he'd filled his dedicated notes notebook with the morning's inventory. The accords were dense and old and fascinating in the way that powerful old things tend to be when you know they're about to be relevant to your life. They'd been signed in 1711, revised in 1843, amended in 1978. The 1978 amendment was interesting because it added a specific clause about magical persons under the age of majority, expanding goblin jurisdiction to include charms placed on magical children without parental consent. 1978, Hermione said, reading over his shoulder. 3 years before my parents died, Harry said. It was added for a reason, she said. This amendment. Someone lobbied for it. Someone knew it was needed. Harry looked at the page. Find out who sponsored the amendment. Hermione went to find the legislative record. She came back 20 minutes later with a narrow volume and an expression like someone who has found something they both expected and didn't want to find. The 1978 amendment was sponsored by the Wisingamot representative for the ancient House of Potter, she said. Your grandfather. Charles Potter. Harry sat back in his chair. His grandfather had built the legal mechanism that was now being used to protect him. Had looked at the world in 1978 and seen something wrong enough with it to push through new law, to add protections for magical children that didn't exist before. Had seen it coming, maybe, or just been the kind of person who saw the shape of a problem and addressed it. He thought about his parents. About a house in Godric's Hollow that he only knew from photographs. About a woman with his eyes who had, according to everyone, died to protect him, and a man who had laughed easily and flown well and apparently come from people who built protections into law. I'd like to visit that vault, Harry said, quietly. The family vault. When this is all resolved. I want to see what they left behind. We'll go together, Hermione said, matter-of-factly, in the way she said things that she'd already decided were true. The first charm removal session was at 4 o'clock, after last lesson. Ragnarok had sent one of his cursebreakers, the younger, precise one, whose name was Firebrace, a goblin in his professional prime with extraordinary dexterity and the manner of a surgeon, focused and quiet and entirely without the theatrical quality some powerful people had. He explained each step before he did it, which Harry appreciated more than he'd expected to. I'll take 8 today, Firebrace said. The upper layer tracking and monitoring cluster. They're the most isolated from your core signature, removal is clean and will cause minimal disruption. Will it hurt? Some discomfort. The closest equivalent in human experience is the sensation of a plaster being removed. He paused. A very thorough plaster. Right, Harry said. It was more than that. It wasn't pain, exactly, but it was significant. 8 distinct moments of release, each one carrying a different texture, some sharp and some slow, and with each one his magic did the thing it had done with the first 3 but more so. The air in the hospital wing smelled like a storm 3 times, and once every candle in the room flared briefly to 3 times its normal height, and once the window blew open on its own and the evening air came in cold and clean. After the 8th one, Harry sat in the sudden quiet of himself and felt, more. Still more. He was always going to be more, apparently, until all 54 were gone, and each increment was its own revelation. Ron, who had sat in the corner of the room throughout, watching with the specific expression of someone who is trying very hard not to look impressed but is deeply impressed, said nothing until Firebrace had packed his equipment and left with a professional nod and a note that Harry's next session would be in 3 days. Then Ron said, every time he took one off, the candles went weird. I noticed, Harry said. And the window. Also noticed. Ron was quiet for a moment. How do you feel? Harry thought about how to answer that honestly. Like, he said slowly, the volume was turned down on something for a very long time, and now it's being turned up, and it's a bit overwhelming but mostly I'm just annoyed that it was turned down. Ron absorbed this. Fair, he said. Makes sense. Then, Dumbledore's getting arrested tomorrow. Yes. My mum loves Dumbledore, Ron said. It came out quiet, not as a complaint and not as an accusation, just as a true thing that was sitting in him, something he was turning over. I know, Harry said. She's going to be, he stopped. I mean, I know he's done wrong. I've just read the whole list. I know it. But he shook his head. She's going to think I've betrayed something. Harry looked at him. You haven't. I know I haven't. The thing she loves about Dumbledore, Harry said, carefully, is real. The idea of it. The symbol. The person who defeated Grindelwald and stood for something. That's real. He just also did this. He paused. Both of those things can be true at once. Ron thought about that. She's not going to see it that way at first. No, Harry said. But later maybe. Yeah, Harry said. Later, maybe. Ron nodded, and his shoulders settled, and he said, all right. I'm with you. 3 words. Simple and complete. Harry held on to them. He had dinner and went back to the common room and tried to do homework and managed most of it. Hermione had compiled 4 pages of notes from the library that she pushed across to him without comment, and he read them with one eye while finishing a transfiguration essay with the other. At 9 o'clock he was sitting by the fire when the portrait hole opened and a familiar face came in, Percy Weasley, Ron's prefect brother, who had the look of someone who had been walking very fast from somewhere with a destination in mind. He spotted Harry and came straight over with a precision that said this was not accidental. I've heard something, Percy said, lowering himself into the chair across from Harry with the gravity of a person twice his age. About this morning. About the goblins. You'll hear more tomorrow, Harry said. Percy looked at him. He was a boy who sorted everything into categories of proper and improper, expected and unexpected, and Harry could see him trying to find the right category for this. Is it serious? Very, Harry said. Percy Weasley sat up straighter. Is there anything I can do? Properly. Officially. He said the last words with a weight that revealed everything about what he valued. Harry considered him. Tomorrow is going to be chaotic, he said. There are going to be students who don't understand what's happening and staff members who don't know how to handle it and people who are going to say things and make things worse. Someone calm and authoritative keeping things in order would be useful. Percy absorbed this like he'd been handed a mission. I can do that, he said. I know you can, Harry said. Percy left with the bearing of someone with purpose. Ron appeared from the stairs in his pajamas and watched his brother go and said, Did you just use Percy? I gave him something useful to do, Harry said. Ron considered this. That's a bit brilliant, actually. Harry closed his transfiguration essay and stared at the fire and let himself think about tomorrow, about the Great Hall, about breakfast, about the 4 Gringotts enforcement officers who would be there with a warrant in 24 hours, and about the expression on Albus Dumbledore's face when someone finally came to tell him that the walls he had so carefully built had been dismantled while he ate his porridge. He thought about being 15 months old and someone he'd been raised to trust putting a self-esteem charm on him. He looked at his hands in the firelight and his magic pressed warmly against his skin, present and awake, 11 years of artificial quiet finally, beginning to end. Get some sleep, he told Ron. You too, Ron said. In a bit, Harry said. The fire settled. The common room emptied. Harry sat in the orange warmth of it and planned tomorrow with the focused calm of someone who has very recently discovered they were born for exactly this, and let the knowing of it sit in him like a light. Chapter 3, The headmaster's morning breakfast at Hogwarts was, on ordinary days, a comfortable institution. The great hall filled gradually between 7 and 8, students arriving in states of varying wakefulness, the enchanted ceiling shifting through its morning gradients, the smell of eggs and kippers and strong tea anchoring everything in the pleasant mundanity of another school day beginning. This was not an ordinary day. Harry came down early, deliberately, and took his seat at the Gryffindor table at 7:10 with Ron on his left and Hermione on his right, and he loaded a plate with toast and eggs and ate with the methodical steadiness of someone who had decided that no matter what happened this morning, he was going to have a proper breakfast first. He'd learned at the Dursleys that you ate when food was available because availability was not guaranteed, and even now, with 3 meals a day a reliable fixture of his life, the habit remained, and he found it useful in ways he hadn't anticipated. It grounded him, this simple biological act, when everything else was tilting. "What time?" Hermione said, very quietly, over her pumpkin juice. "Ragnarok said the warrant would be issued at the start of business hours," Harry said. "Which for Gringotts is 7:30. Ron looked at the high table. Dumbledore was already there, which was unusual. He typically arrived mid-breakfast, making his appearance with the benevolent lateness of someone who moves at a more elevated pace than ordinary people. This morning he was seated early, eating with deliberate attention, silver hair gleaming in the candlelight. He looked like he always looked. Wise. Ancient. Certain. He also looked, Harry thought, like a man who was waiting for something. "He knows something is happening," Harry said. "Does he know what?" Ron said. "He'll have felt the charm removals," Hermione said, quietly. "If the tracking charms were his, removing them would have broken the magical connection. He'll have felt 11 of them go silent." Harry nodded. He'd thought about this. Dumbledore hadn't reached across the table at dinner last night or sent a message or appeared at the hospital wing. He'd let the silence accumulate, which said something about how he intended to manage this, not confrontation, not acknowledgement, but watchful management. Letting the pieces settle and then stepping into whatever shape they made. It was a reasonable strategy, Harry thought, if you assumed you controlled the shape of things. The Great Hall was filling. Third years, fourth years, the whole chattering cross-section of Hogwarts at breakfast, and none of them knew yet, and Harry watched them with the specific affection of someone who is about to do something that will change everyone's morning whether they like it or not. He felt some guilt about that. Not much, but some. Neville sat down across from Harry with a bowl of porridge and immediately sensed the temperature of things. Neville was better at sensing temperature than people gave him credit for. He looked at Harry and said nothing, just ate his porridge with the attentiveness of someone keeping his head down through a weather event. 7:40. 7:50. The hall was nearly full. Snape came in at 5 to 8 and took his seat at the high table with his usual economy of movement, robes settling around him, and his eyes moved across the hall in their habitual sweep and landed on Harry for approximately 1 second before moving on. Harry watched the landing and the leaving and the quality of both. Then the doors opened. Not the main doors, the side entrance, the one that connected the hall to the main corridor near the staircase, the one that staff used when they were coming from the direction of the entrance hall. 4 figures came through it, and the sound of the great hall didn't stop exactly, but it paused, in a rippling way, table by table as students registered what they were seeing. They were not the same 4 from yesterday morning. These were different goblins, broader and with a bearing that was unmistakably not administrative. They wore the same dark Gringotts robes but with a different insignia at the collar, a small embossed seal that Harry couldn't read from this distance but that Hermione, beside him, identified in a low voice as the seal of the Gringotts Enforcement Division. They walked directly toward the high table. The Great Hall was, by this point, very quiet. Dumbledore looked up from his breakfast. His expression moved through something, surprise, assessment, resolution, in the space of about 2 seconds, and then it settled into the serene attentiveness he brought to everything, the expression of a man who is never quite surprised by anything because he has always considered all the possibilities. He set down his spoon with a small precise click. The lead enforcement officer stopped at the edge of the high table and spoke in a voice that carried clearly through the silence of the hall. Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore. I am Enforcement Officer Goldhand of Gringotts Bank, acting under the authority of the International Goblin Accords of 1711, as amended. I am here to inform you that a warrant has been issued for your arrest on charges of unlawful magical enchantment of a minor, unauthorized access to a sealed magical vault, and systematic violation of a magical person's autonomy and signature without consent. The silence in the Great Hall was total. Not shocked silent, beyond shocked, into the territory where a sound is so large that it takes up all the available space and there's no room left for individual reactions. 700 students and a dozen staff members had all, simultaneously, run out of responses. Dumbledore looked at Goldhand with the expression of someone who is about to manage this carefully. "Officer Goldhand," he said, pleasantly, "perhaps we might discuss this somewhere more private." "My office, no," Goldhand said. "Just that." Short and final and with the quality of a stone wall. "This warrant does not permit private negotiation," Goldhand continued. "You will accompany us to Gringotts for formal processing. You may send word to your legal counsel, who may meet you there." He placed a small sealed document on the table in front of Dumbledore, the warrant, Harry assumed, official and goblin stamped. "This is your copy." Dumbledore looked at the document. He looked at the 4 enforcement officers. He looked, once, across the great hall, and his eyes found Harry, not in the searching, surprised way of someone who has just understood something, but with a quality of recognition, of acknowledgement. A look that said "I see you," and underneath it, something older and more complicated. Harry looked back. He held it without flinching, without the automatic deference that 11 years of careful management had trained into him, and he held it until Dumbledore looked away. "Very well," Dumbledore said, and stood. He stood with dignity. That was the thing, there was no scene, no protestation, no reaching for his wand or summoning his considerable magical power or doing any of the dozen things a man of his ability could have done. He folded his napkin, set it beside his plate, and walked around the high table and into the space between it and the long student tables, and the 4 enforcement officers arranged themselves around him, and he said, to the hall in general, in a voice that was perfectly measured, "I trust Hogwarts is in good hands while I attend to this matter." It was a remarkable thing to say. Harry recognized it as exactly what it was, a last act of management, a gesture toward normalcy, an attempt to reframe what was happening as a temporary administrative issue rather than an arrest. And it mostly worked, because Dumbledore saying something with that quality of certainty made it feel true, made the hall feel briefly like this was fine, this was routine, like a headmaster being arrested by Gringotts officers at breakfast was just something that happened sometimes and everyone should continue their porridge. Then he was through the side doors, and the enforcement officers were around him, and the doors swung closed. The great hall erupted. Harry sat in the center of it and ate a piece of toast. Hermione had both hands flat on the table and was staring at the closed doors with an expression of careful processing. Ron let out a long slow breath like he'd been holding it for the past 4 minutes. "Blimey," Ron said. "Yes," Harry agreed. "He just went." "He didn't have a choice," Hermione said. "The Accords override his authority here. If he'd resisted, the enforcement officers have the legal right to use binding magic. He's smart enough to know that making a scene would only confirm the charges. Managing his exit was the best play he had left." Harry had thought the same thing. That was what made Dumbledore genuinely formidable. He was beginning to understand, not just the raw power, not just the long accumulated network of loyalty and obligation, but the intelligence. The man had realized in approximately 3 seconds that he had no good options and had chosen the one that left him the most dignity. That was a particular kind of mind. It was also, Harry thought, exactly the quality that had made what he did so difficult to see coming. You couldn't build a cage that's sophisticated without real intelligence. You couldn't maintain it for a decade without real care and attention. The same mind that had just managed a public arrest with grace was the same mind that had put a self-esteem charm on a 15-month-old. Both things. The same person. He finished his toast. McGonagall was already on her feet, moving down from the high table with rapid precision, and she reached the center of the hall and said, in the voice she used when she wanted absolute silence and always got it, "Students will finish their breakfast and proceed to their first lessons. There will be no deviation from the day's schedule." The noise level dropped by about half. It didn't stop, but it organized itself into something more controlled, and students began eating again with the slightly dazed quality of people trying to act normal while processing something abnormal. McGonagall caught Harry's eye across the hall, and he gave a small nod, and she held his gaze for a moment with an expression that was complicated and real and said several things at once, and then she turned to manage the situation. The Slytherin table was particularly loud. Harry could see Malfoy from across the hall, and Malfoy was not eating. He was leaning in toward Pansy Parkinson and Blaise Zabini with an expression of intensity that Harry recognized as the particular intensity of someone whose fundamental understanding of how the world is ordered has just taken a serious knock and is scrambling to explain it away. His father was a Dumbledore supporter, Harry knew from the general background knowledge of the wizarding world he'd been absorbing since September. The Malfoys were allied with the idea of Dumbledore as the great symbol, the fixed star. Watching that star get walked out by goblin enforcement officers had done something to Malfoy's face that Harry thought was probably going to take a while to resolve. Not his problem, currently. His problem, currently, was Snape. He looked at the potions professor, who had not moved from his seat at the high table and had not changed his expression and had not, as far as Harry could tell, made a single visible reaction to anything that had just happened. He sat like a dark blade in a dark room, perfectly still, perfectly contained. He was looking at his tea. The 9 charms sat between them like a specific and unresolved weight. "He's not going to run," Hermione said quietly, following Harry's gaze. "No," Harry said. "He knows they have his signature. He knows they'll come for him when the broader investigation completes. Running would only confirm it." She paused. "He's going to sit and wait and manage whatever comes. Like Dumbledore," Ron said. "Similar training," Harry said, and left it there. First lesson was charms, and Flitwick was determinedly professional, maintaining the warm focused energy of his classroom with the impressive single-mindedness of a man who believed that a well-run lesson was the appropriate response to almost any disruption. He did notice, Harry was certain, that his students were distracted. He made 3 of them repeat incantations they'd gotten on the first try in previous lessons, but he didn't address it, just moved them through the material and ended with a reading assignment that Harry thought was probably gentle by design. Between charms and their next lesson, the corridor was a different kind of animal than usual. Groups of students clustered in knots of urgent conversation, 5th and 6th years mostly, who had enough background to have opinions. Harry walked through them with Ron and Hermione and caught fragments of it all. "Can't just arrest the headmaster, Gringotts has the right, it's in the Accords, my father says Dumbledore is, what exactly did he do to Potter, 52 charms, I heard, 52, that last one stopped Harry mid-step. He hadn't told anyone the number." He looked at Ron and Ron looked at him. Hermione said, "Gringotts is required to make public disclosure of a warrant's basis within 24 hours of issue. The warrant will have the details. It's a matter of public record now." "Oh," Harry said. "The Prophet will have it by this afternoon," she said. "Front page, I'd expect." "Wonderful," he said, and kept walking. Transfiguration with McGonagall was a different experience entirely. She walked in and set her notes on her desk and looked at her class, specifically at Harry, and said, "I am aware that many of you have questions about this morning's events. I will answer what I can at the end of this lesson. Until then, we have a great deal of work to cover." She paused. "Mr. Potter, I'd like you to demonstrate the primary incantation for turning pewter to glass, if you would." It was not a random choice of demonstration. It was McGonagall's way of saying several things at once without saying any of them out loud. "I see you, I'm managing this, I'm not going to tiptoe around you, we're going to do the work." Harry appreciated it in the clean, uncomplicated way he appreciated most things McGonagall did. He turned the pewter to glass. It was perfect, and she said so, and they moved on. At the end of the lesson she kept her promise. She stood at the front of the class with 11 first-year Gryffindors watching her and said, "You deserve honesty, and I intend to provide it. Albus Dumbledore has been taken to Gringotts to respond to serious legal charges under the Goblin Accords. I am now acting in his capacity as head of this school until the Hogwarts Board of Governors determines a course of action. Your education continues without interruption. Your safety is not compromised." She looked at Harry. Are there questions? What happens to Dumbledore? Neville asked, from the side of the room where he'd been listening with his shoulders drawn in and his eyes attentive. That is for the Wisengamot to determine, ultimately, McGonagall said. There will be a formal hearing. Will he come back? Lavender Brown said. I don't know, McGonagall said, and the honesty of it, the clean refusal to offer false comfort, was so unlike what Harry expected from an authority figure in this moment that he felt something warm toward her that was different from what he'd felt before. It was closer to respect that you chose rather than respect you defaulted to. What are we supposed to do? Seamus said. Go to lunch, McGonagall said, and then to your afternoon lessons. When the world is uncertain, the most stabilizing thing you can do is the work in front of you. Harry thought that was actually very good advice. Lunch was complicated. The Daily Prophet's Owls arrived midway through it, the afternoon edition, rushed out 3 hours early, and the headline was visible from across the Great Hall, Dumbledore arrested, Gringotts issues warrant for magical violation of Harry Potter, 54 illegal enchantments confirmed, full details page 2. The noise level in the Great Hall hit a new register. Harry read the article with his fork in one hand and his pumpkin juice in the other, and the article was actually fairly accurate by the standards of a publication that had, in the past, run a story titled, Are Cauldron Bottom Thickness Standards Ruining British Wizarding Industry, with complete sincerity. The basics were there, the warrant, the charge list, the 20,000 galleons, the forensic audit, the scope of it. It named Dumbledore and noted the charges included Snape's name and 2 others whose investigation was ongoing. It also included a quote from the Gringotts press office, Gringotts Bank takes the violation of a magical person's signature with the utmost seriousness. The integrity of a witch or wizard's magical core is the most fundamental of all protected rights under the Accords. We acted upon credible evidence with the full authority of our legal mandate and will continue to do so. They said it clearly, Hermione said, reading alongside him. They didn't hedge. Goblins don't hedge, Harry said. No, she agreed, with something like appreciation. Ron was not reading. He was sitting very still, looking at nothing in particular, with his food barely touched. Harry watched him without being obvious about it. Ron had the quality of someone having a very fast internal conversation with himself, the kind you have when you've already made a decision but you're running through all the arguments against it anyway, not because you've changed your mind but because you're honest enough to hear them out. After about 2 minutes Ron picked up his fork and began eating. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. It was midway through the afternoon, during a free period, that things got more complicated. Harry was in the library, working through the reading Flitwick had assigned and additionally reading through a copy of the Goblin Accords that Hermione had identified on the shelves, the annotated edition, which was more useful, when a 5th-year Slytherin named Flint, older brother of Marcus Flint on the Quidditch team, dropped a copy of the Prophet on his table and said, "You happy with yourself, Potter?" Harry looked up. Flint was broad-shouldered and had the expression of someone who needed the world to confirm it owed him something. He was with 2 other 5th-years whose names Harry didn't know. "Yes," Harry said, and looked back at his book. Flint's jaw worked. "Dumbledore is the greatest wizard alive. You and your goblin friends my medical team found illegal charms in my magical signature," Harry said, still reading, "and the legal authority responsible for those charges acted on that evidence. That's what happened." He looked up. "Which part of that are you objecting to specifically?" "He was protecting you," Flint said, "the way people say things they've heard other people say enough times that it feels like their own thought. Everything Dumbledore did was for the greater good. Including the self-esteem charm on a 15-month-old?" Harry said. Flint opened his mouth. "Or the 20,000 galleons from a vault he had no authorization to access?" Harry said. His voice was completely level. "Or the compulsion charms that suppressed my magical expression for a decade? Which part of that is protecting me, specifically?" The silence around the library table spread outward like a dropped stone in water. Several students at nearby tables had gone very still, listening with the attentiveness of people who know they are hearing something that will be repeated later. Flint said nothing. He didn't have an answer, because there wasn't one, and having the architecture of your argument demolished with that much precision by an 11-year-old was apparently not something he'd prepared for. "I'll take my newspaper back," Harry said, and slid it off the table and returned to his book. Flint left. Ron let out a breath. "You're going to have to do that a lot," he said. "I know," Harry said. "I don't mind." "You really don't, do you?" Ron said, with something between admiration and faint disbelief. "Someone's going to defend him in every conversation I walk into for the next month," Harry said. "I'd rather it's me having those conversations than someone else having them for me." He paused. "And I'd rather have them with facts than with feelings." "Still," Ron said. "I've had 11 years of keeping quiet about things that were wrong," Harry said. "I've got 11 years of conversation stored up." The portrait of the fat lady let them into the common room at 5 that afternoon, and Hermione immediately spread her notes across the table by the window and said, without preamble, "The Minister for Magic issued a statement an hour ago." Harry sat down. "What did he say?" "He said he was deeply concerned and that the Ministry would be conducting its own inquiry into the charges and that he had full confidence in the British magical justice system to determine the truth." She looked up. "Which is Ministry speak for we had no idea this was happening and were panicking." "He also said," she continued, flipping to the next page, "that out of concern for the school's stability, the Ministry would be sending a representative to Hogwarts to monitor the situation." Harry looked at her. "A representative. Not named in the statement. But someone the Ministry trusts to be their eyes in the school during an investigation that implicates the people they're most deeply associated with," Harry said. "Yes," she said. "That could go very badly," Ron said. "It could," Harry said. "Let's make sure we know more than whoever they send." He spent the next hour reading. Not Flitwick's assignment, though he did that too, but everything Hermione had pulled together, the accords, the warrant details, the legal procedure for the Wisengamot hearing, the structure of the hearing itself. He read with the specific focus of someone who knows they're going to be in the room when the important things are decided and wants to understand the room. Hermione watched him read. After a while she said, quietly, so Ron wouldn't hear. Ron had fallen asleep in his chair with his herbology textbook across his face. "How are you actually doing?" "You keep asking me that," Harry said. "Because I keep getting the same answer that doesn't quite answer the question." He looked at her. She had her chin resting on her hand and was watching him with the particular focused patience she brought to problems that required sustained attention. She was going to be extraordinary at whatever she decided to do with her life, he thought. She was already extraordinary, but she was going to be the kind of person who remade things. "I'm angry," he said. "Not in the hot way. In the underneath way. The kind that doesn't burn off." He paused. "I've been angry about the Dursleys my whole life and I thought it was just me. How I was wired. Now I know part of it was suppressed by a charm, which means what I would have felt was even bigger, and that's," he stopped. "A lot," she said. "Yeah. There are people," she said carefully, "who won't see it as clearly as you do. Who'll insist it was complicated, that he meant well, that the intention matters." "He meant to control me," Harry said. "The intention isn't complicated." "No," she said. "It isn't." She went back to her notes. He went back to the accords. Ron snored once, softly, and the herbology textbook slid 6 inches down his face. Dinner was a renewed chaos of conversations and reactions and a sort of collective recalibration happening in real time. The Prophet had been read by everyone by now, the article in particular, and the school had divided into the predictable factions, those who believed the charges, those who didn't, those who weren't sure and were using the ambiguity as social currency. The Slytherin table was mostly in the defensive camp, quietly or loudly depending on the individual. Hufflepuff was largely in the believing camp and predominantly upset about it, which was the Hufflepuff way, they cared, and being let down by someone they'd cared about registered hard. Ravenclaw was engaged in approximately 15 simultaneous debates and seemed to be generating new data points in real time. Gryffindor was mostly behind Harry, which he was grateful for but also mildly wary of. Being behind someone uncritically was its own kind of problem, and he'd already had more than enough of people making decisions about him without his input. McGonagall ate at the high table with a Gryffindor-shaped posture of composed authority, and Snape ate beside her with the quality of a man waiting for a bus that he suspects is not going to come. They did not speak to each other. They did not speak to anyone. Toward the end of dinner, a small figure appeared at Harry's elbow. Dobby. Or, not Dobby, but a house elf in Hogwarts livery, young, with ears like satellite dishes and enormous green eyes, who bobbed anxiously and said, in a small urgent voice, "Professor McGonagall is asking for Mr. Harry Potter after dinner, sir." "In her office, sir." "Just Mr. Harry Potter, sir." He added this last with an apologetic look at Ron and Hermione that was somehow simultaneously aimed at keeping them informed and desperately trying not to upset them. "Tell her I'll be there," Harry said. The elf vanished with a crack. Ron said, "Just you?" "She probably wants to say something she doesn't want to say in front of other people," Harry said. "That's fine." "It might not be fine," Ron said. "She might be trying to. She's not trying to manage me," Harry said, not impatiently. "She's trying to have a real conversation, and real conversations go better in private." He ate his last bite of shepherd's pie and stood up. "I'll tell you how it goes." McGonagall's office smelled of parchment and something floral and very old books and the specific kind of order that comes from someone having occupied a space for decades and organized it into an extension of themselves. She was behind her desk when he knocked and entered, and she looked up from a letter she'd been writing and said, "Sit down, Mr. Potter." He sat. She looked at him for a moment with the expression she'd been working through all day, complicated, layered, something that kept resolving and then opening back up again. Finally she said, "I owe you an apology." He hadn't expected that precisely. "Professor, please let me say it," she said. "I have been at this school for 40 years. I have known Albus Dumbledore for most of that time. I have trusted him, admired him, supported his decisions in cases where I had doubts because I believed his judgment was fundamentally sound." She paused. "I did not know about the charms. I want you to understand that I did not know." "I believe you," Harry said. "But not knowing," she said, "is not the same as not being culpable. I have had concerns about your placement with the Dursleys since before you arrived at this school. I raised those concerns once, in 1981, in a letter, and was told they were being managed." Her jaw tightened. "I should have raised them again. I should have checked. I should have." She stopped. Harry looked at her. "What would you have done?" he said, not unkindly. "Seriously. If you'd known. What would you have done?" "This," she said. "Exactly this. Gone to the only authority he couldn't reach." She paused. "Which is perhaps why he made sure I didn't know." Harry nodded slowly. "Yeah," he said. "That's how it works. The people most likely to stop you are the first ones you manage." McGonagall looked at him for a long moment with something in her expression that was harder to define, not quite sadness and not quite pride and not quite either. "You're 11 years old," she said. "You keep saying that," Harry said. "I keep finding it relevant." He almost smiled. "What did you want to talk to me about?" "Several things," she said, and straightened, and shifted into a more professional mode, though the emotion didn't leave the room entirely, it just moved to the edges. "First, the ministry is sending an observer to the school. I received a formal notification an hour ago. Her name is Dolores Umbridge, she is a senior undersecretary to the minister, and she will be arriving Monday with what the letter describes as a mandate to ensure stability and continuity of educational standards." "Umbridge," Harry said. "She is a bureaucrat of the most committed variety," McGonagall said. "Her presence here will be challenging. I am warning you because you are the person most likely to be in her line of sight." She paused. I would ask you to be careful with her. I'll be honest with her, Harry said. That's what I've got. McGonagall's expression had the quality of someone deciding not to argue with something they partially agree with. Second, she said. Professor Snape. Gringotts will complete their investigation of his involvement by the end of the week. He knows this. In the interim, I am still required to maintain the school's functioning, which means he remains in his teaching role for now. She looked at Harry directly. If at any point you feel uncomfortable, I'm not uncomfortable, Harry said. He's uncomfortable. That's different. McGonagall blinked once. Yes, she said. I suppose it is. She folded her hands on her desk. Third. Your first Quidditch match is scheduled for 3 weeks from Saturday. I see no reason to change that. Harry looked at her. That's the third thing. You are a child, she said, and children need things to look forward to. She said it with complete seriousness. He felt the warmth toward her sharpen into something real and specific. Okay, he said. Good. Are there things you need from me, she said. Formally, or informally, or in any capacity at all. I am asking sincerely. Harry thought about it honestly, giving the question the weight it deserved. I need you to keep running the school the way you'd run it if you were running it for me, he said. Not for an institution. Not for appearances. For me, and for everyone else who comes through here. She looked at him for a beat. That is, she said, with a precision that suggested she was choosing the exact word, exactly what I intend. Then we're aligned, Harry said, and stood. She stood too. Mr. Potter. For what it's worth, she stopped and then said it. Your parents would be very proud. It landed the way those words always did, with the particular weight of being both impossible to fully receive and impossible to discard. He held it for a second, turning it over. I hope so, he said. But mostly I'm doing this for me. She nodded once. Good, she said. That's good. He walked back through the castle in the evening quiet of it, the torches low, the portraits whispering to themselves, the occasional distant sound of older students in common rooms or the library. The castle felt different again, as it had been feeling different since yesterday morning, not physically different, the same stones, the same stairs, the same trick step on the 7th floor, but in the way places feel when something fundamental has shifted. Like the castle was making a new accommodation for him, adjusting its sense of what he was. He passed a portrait of a woman in medieval dress who looked at him as he walked by and said, quite clearly, "Good evening, Mr. Potter." "Evening," Harry said, slightly surprised. "We've been watching," she said. "The portraits. Since yesterday." She paused, and the quality of her expression was something very specific. "Your mother's portrait is in the headmaster's office. She was very glad this morning." Harry stopped walking. His chest did something large and complicated. "Lily Potter's portrait is in the office?" "3rd floor landing on the south side, actually," the medieval woman said, gently correcting herself. "That wing has not been regularly accessed in some years. Room 302. The portraits in the main office thought it was better she was, separately housed." She said the last words with a care that told him she knew exactly what she was implying. "Separately from Dumbledore," Harry said. "Yes," she said. He stood in the corridor for a long moment with the torchlight moving softly around him and his heart doing something he didn't have clean language for. "I'll find it," he said. "We'll make sure you do," she said. He walked on. He didn't go to room 302 tonight, not yet, because tonight he needed to sit down and think, and tomorrow was going to be its own kind of difficult, and there was a Quidditch match to prepare for, and Umbridge arriving on Monday, and the ongoing investigation and the Wisengamot hearing and all the rest of it. But it was there. She was there. And when the time was right, when he had processed enough of the rest of it that he could be present for that moment the way it deserved, he would go. He found Ron and Hermione in the common room, Ron no longer asleep and actually doing his herbology essay with the focused effort of someone who had decided to do the adult thing, and Hermione making annotations in the margins of 4 separate books simultaneously in a way that suggested some kind of personal best. "How was it?" Ron asked. "Good," Harry said. "Umbridge is coming Monday." Ron and Hermione looked at each other. "We know that name," Hermione said. "She works for the ministry," Harry said. McGonagall said to be careful. "Which means," Ron said, "you're going to be the opposite of careful." "I'm going to be exactly as careful as the situation requires," Harry said, and sat down, and took out his charms reading, and the 3 of them worked in the companionable quiet of the common room until well past 9 when the fire burned low and the castle settled around them, and outside the windows the grounds were dark and wide and the first snow of winter was beginning to come down soft and steady, covering everything that had been before. In the morning, the castle would still be standing. The lessons would still run. The children would still eat breakfast and argue about Quidditch and forget their homework and find each other in the corridors. The institution would hold because institutions mostly held, and McGonagall's hand on the tiller was steadier than most, and the goblins were doing their work in London, and the warrant was stamped and sealed and entirely real. And Harry Potter, age 11, had a Nimbus 2011 years of conversation stored up and 54 charms being removed one careful session at a time, and tomorrow and the day after that and the day after that were entirely, for the first time, his own. Chapter 4. What magic feels like. The snow that had started Friday night was still going Saturday morning, not heavily, just a persistent quiet fall that softened the edges of the grounds and made the castle look like something out of a picture book. Harry watched it from the window of his dormitory while the other boys slept, sitting on the sill with his knees pulled up, thinking about nothing in particular and everything at once. He'd been waking early since the charm removal started. Not anxious early, not nightmare early, just awake, with the quality of someone whose body has recalibrated its relationship to rest. He slept deeply and woke clean, which was new. At the Dursleys he'd woken the way you wake in cold water, sudden, defensive, already bracing. At Hogwarts in the first weeks he'd woken better than that but still with a residue of something, a low background tension that he'd attributed to adjusting to a new place. Now he thought it had probably been 44 remaining charms saying good morning and settling back into their work. 11 down. 43 to go. His second removal session was today. Firebrace had scheduled it for 9 in the morning, and Harry had been thinking about it since Thursday, not with dread but with the anticipatory attention of someone waiting for a door to open further. He got dressed, went down to the common room, found it empty except for Hermione, who was sitting at the table near the window with what appeared to be a different large book than yesterday's large book, though with Hermione the distinction was sometimes academic. "You're up early," she said, without looking up. "So are you." "I didn't sleep," she said, with the matter-of-fact tone of someone who has made peace with this. "What are you reading?" She held up the cover. Fundamentals of Magical Signature Theory, 5th edition. "I wanted to understand what Firebrace is actually doing," she said. "When he removes the charms. The mechanism." Harry sat down across from her. "And? It's extraordinary, actually." She turned the book toward him, pointing to a dense diagram that looked like a geological cross-section. "Your magical signature is, imagine a fingerprint, but 3-dimensional, and living. Every witch and wizard has one that's unique to them. It develops from birth, shaped by your inherent magical potential, your bloodline, your environment, your early experiences." She traced the diagram with one finger. "Foreign enchantments placed in the signature are, the book calls them intrusions. They're like splinters. They become partially integrated over time, especially the ones placed in early infancy, which is why the deeper ones require more care to remove. They've been there so long the surrounding magical tissue has grown around them." Harry looked at the diagram. "What does that mean for the removal?" "Firebrace is essentially performing what amounts to microsurgery," she said. "With magical instruments, but the precision required is similar." She paused. The book says that in cases of very long-term suppressive enchantment, the removal process can result in what they call expansion events. The natural signature expanding back into the space the enchantments were occupying. Is that dangerous? Not to you, she said. It can be significantly powerful, though. The book documents a case from 1923 of an adult witch who had suppressive enchantments removed after 40 years, and the expansion event shattered every glass surface in a 3-room radius. Harry thought about the candles, and the plants, and the window. We should probably make sure Firebrace knows about the glass thing. I've already written him a note, Hermione said, and turned back to her book. Harry smiled and went to get breakfast before the hall filled. He ate alone in the great hall's early quiet, just him and a few scattered 6th years and a 3rd-year Hufflepuff who was doing homework at the table and hadn't noticed Harry come in. The enchanted ceiling showed the snow sky, pale and even. He had porridge and toast and a cup of tea and thought about the portrait in room 302. He'd thought about it a lot since Friday. Had almost gone 3 separate times and talked himself out of it each time, not from fear but from something more like rightness. Waiting for the right moment. He didn't know what he'd say to a portrait of his mother, didn't know what a portrait could say back, how much she knew, what she remembered. He didn't know if she looked like the photographs or different, didn't know if she'd have his eyes looking back at him or if that would be too much. He'd go today. After the session with Firebrace. He finished breakfast and walked to the hospital wing with the snow falling past the windows all the way. Firebrace arrived exactly on time, which Harry was coming to understand was simply the Goblin professional standard. He had his instruments, and Hermione's note, and a small additional case that he hadn't brought the first time. He read the note and looked at Harry with the level assessment of someone recalibrating their safety parameters. Your friend is well-researched, he said. She's the most well-researched person I've ever met, Harry said. The additional case, Firebrace said, opening it to reveal a series of crystal dampening rods arranged in a hexagonal pattern, is a precautionary measure. These will absorb excess magical output during the session. Not to suppress the expansion is correct and necessary, but to give it direction. He looked at Harry. Think of it as a channel rather than a cap. I don't want it capped, Harry said. It won't be, Firebrace said. You have my word. Pomfrey was present, as she had been for the first session. She stood at a distance that was professional and watchful, and Harry had the sense that she'd been awake thinking about the expansion events too, because she'd cleared most of the breakable items to a storage cabinet at the far end of the wing. How many today? Harry asked. 12, Firebrace said. I want to take the second monitoring cluster and the first 2 compulsion enchantments. Harry sat on the bed and straightened his spine and said, all right. The monitoring cluster went first. 8 charms, each one carrying the sensation Firebrace had described as a thorough plaster, 8 small releases, each leaving behind a trace of that by now familiar expansion, his magic moving into the cleared space the way water moves into a new channel, naturally and without particular effort. He felt sharper after each one, the world slightly more defined, his awareness of his own magical signature more precise. Then the compulsion enchantments. The first one, Firebrace identified it before removal as the earliest placed compulsion, dating from approximately 15 months, was different from the tracking and monitoring charms. Removing it required more time, more precision, a careful lateral approach that Firebrace explained as he worked. The intrusion is deeply integrated, he said, in the focused quiet of someone performing surgery. You'll feel pressure rather than release. It may be intense. It will pass. I'm fine, Harry said. I know, Firebrace said, and began. The pressure was significant. Not painful, but significant in the way that large things are significant, the way a tidal shift is significant, or the moment before a storm breaks. It built for about 20 seconds, and the dampening rods Firebrace had placed around the bed began to glow, absorbing the excess, and Harry felt the compulsion charm resist before it yielded, the way a long-embedded splinter resists before it comes free. Then it released. The world went white for approximately 2 seconds. Not his vision, his awareness, everything sharpening at once in a flood of sensation that had no equivalent in his experience. His magic, uncoiled from that oldest, deepest constraint, expanded outward with the pent force of 10 years of suppression, and the dampening rods took most of it but not all of it, and the windows on the west wall of the hospital wing blew fully open, and every candle in the room flared to twice its height, and Pomfrey grabbed the edge of a bed frame for stability, and outside in the grounds Harry could feel, not see, feel, the snow falling, each flake separately, the cold of it and the particular texture of Scottish November and the deep old magic of the castle responding to him the way you respond to someone calling your name. Then it settled. He sat on the bed and breathed. "Are you all right?" Pomfrey said, from across the room, the professional alarm in her voice very precisely managed. "Yes," Harry said. "You looked," she stopped. "What?" "Lit," she said, which wasn't her usual vocabulary and told him more than a longer description would have. Firebrace was checking the dampening rods, running a diagnostic over each one. 3 of the 6 absorbed their maximum capacity, he said. The remaining expansion was directed upward and outward. Structurally, the room is intact. He paused. The second compulsion charm will be stronger than the first. When? Harry said. 10 minutes. You need the interval. Harry sat in the interval and felt himself. Felt the space where the compulsion had been, a space that was enormous, in the way that you don't realize how small a room is until you're outside it. He felt the quality of his own thinking, reaching toward that space, reclaiming it. He tried to identify whether anything felt different yet in the way he processed information and found that, yes. Something was different. Not in a supernatural way, not in the way of sudden omniscience, but in the specific way that a thought he'd begun to have in the last 2 days, a sharp, direct, territorial thought, a thought that said this is mine and I will not have it taken, had been arriving with a slight hesitation before it, a half-second delay, like a foot catching on a step. That delay was gone. He thought about the Dursleys. The thought arrived complete and clean and without the grey ambient acceptance that had always surrounded it. What they had done to him was wrong. Not complicated, not explainable, not understandable given that it was difficult, wrong. He'd known it intellectually for years but had never felt it with this much immediacy, as though the knowing and the feeling had been deliberately kept in separate rooms and the door between them had just been opened. He found that he was not devastated by this. He was resolved. There was a difference. Ready, he said. The second compulsion charm, the one Ragnarok had described as triggered by inappropriate ambition, came out with a force that made the first look like a preliminary. The dampening rods maxed out in the first 3 seconds. The windows went again. The torches on the walls went out entirely, not from the force of it but because the air pressure changed, the magic displacing air in a wave, and then simultaneously every torch in the hospital wing relit, brighter than before, burning with a blue-white intensity that was not standard candlefire. Pomfrey said nothing at all. Firebrace looked at the diagnostic reading on his primary instrument for a long moment and then looked at Harry with an expression that was, for a goblin, remarkably unguarded. "Mr. Potter," he said, "I have been doing this work for 47 years. And?" Harry said. "And I have never seen a signature of this magnitude in a person under 30, Firebrace said, with the flat factual quality of someone who reports things accurately regardless of their impressiveness. "Removing the remaining enchantments is going to be notable." "Good," Harry said. He walked out of the hospital wing at 10:30 with 11 charms removed in one session, 22 total down and 32 remaining, and the world looked the same but felt different, the way things feel after your eyes have adjusted to a new light level. Brighter. More detailed. More his. He went to find room 302. The south wing third-floor corridor was less trafficked than most of the castle, one of those sections that generations of students had learned didn't contain anything directly useful and had therefore quietly opted out of. The torches here burned lower, the portraits were older and less conversational, most of them sleeping or watching him pass with the mild curiosity of those who have learned not to expect much from foot traffic. He found room 302 because the medieval woman from the portrait had clearly spread word through the castle's portrait network. There were 3 portraits with their subjects turned toward the door as he approached it, all of them indicating the door with the subtle spatial attention of people pointing without pointing. He stopped in front of it. The door was old oak, slightly swollen in its frame, the iron handle tarnished. Not locked. He pushed it open. The room inside was small and entirely full of light, which was unexpected. Its windows faced east and the morning snow sky was pale and diffuse through them. It had been a study at some point, shelves along 2 walls still holding old books that nobody had opened in years, a desk covered in a drift of old parchment. And on the wall opposite the windows, in an oval frame of dark wood that had been carved with lily motifs that someone had clearly considered appropriate when they'd commissioned it, was a portrait. She was sitting in a garden. Painted summer, the background all green and gold, and she was reading something, and she looked up when Harry came in. She had red hair and his eyes. He stood in the doorway and looked at her and she looked at him and neither of them said anything for a moment that was very full. "Harry," she said. Her voice was warm and even a little rough, like voices are when they've been waiting to say a particular word for a long time. Her portrait eyes did something that oil paint shouldn't be able to do, which was fill. "Hello," Harry said, and heard how inadequate that was and didn't have anything better, so he walked into the room and pulled the old chair out from the desk and sat down in front of her at eye level. "I've been watching since yesterday morning," she said. "The portraits in the castle, we talk. When Albus was arrested she stopped. Her jaw worked. I wanted to be there. I wanted to be able to," she stopped again. "I know," Harry said. "You shouldn't have had to do that alone," she said. "I wasn't alone," he said. "I had Ron and Hermione and Madam Pomfrey and Ragnock and McGonagall." He paused. "I had people." She looked at him with an expression that he couldn't fully read because it was operating on more dimensions than he had experience with. It was a mother's expression, presumably, but he didn't have a catalogue of mother expressions to reference so he had to work it out from first principles. It seemed to be made up of roughly equal parts pride, grief, relief, and something that was specifically and painfully about his face. "You look like James," she said. "But you look like me too, in some ways. The way you hold your mouth when you're thinking." "Do I?" He didn't know that. "Yes." She smiled, and it was familiar in the way that his own smile in a mirror was familiar, the architecture of it. "The way you came through that door, that's James." He never hesitated in a doorway. "I hesitated for 3 days, Harry said. "But you came," she said. He sat with her for almost an hour. He asked her things and she answered them, and she asked him things and he answered them, and there was a particular quality to the conversation that he thought must be unique to this situation, talking to someone who loved you without condition and was also paint on a canvas, who had the warmth of the real thing and the limitation of the copy, who knew some things and not others, who had been here in this room for 10 years without being certain what was happening to her son and had carried that with the particular endurance of someone who had no other option. She told him about the night in Godric's Hollow, as much as the portrait had access to, her memories only up to the point of her death, the portrait painted from life the year before and updated twice afterward. She told him his father had laughed while flying, that he'd been terrible at potions deliberately because being good at things Snape cared about felt somehow like losing, that his parents had fought once about whether to use Dumbledore as their secret keeper, and that his mother had had reservations and his father had overruled them and she had always thought about that. Sirius Black was supposed to be the keeper, she said, and Harry leaned forward. "I know the name," he said. "I don't know why." "He was your father's best friend," she said. "He's in Azkaban. Supposedly for betraying us." She said supposedly with a weight that told him she was not without her own doubts. "The trial was, Harry, there was no trial. He was sent to Azkaban without a hearing." "That's illegal," Harry said. "Yes," she said. "It is." He filed that away in the column headed Things That Need Addressing later alongside the anonymous vault and Quirrell's secondary nervousness and the ongoing financial audit and what exactly Voldemort's current status was and approximately 17 other items that needed investigation and could not all be investigated simultaneously by one 11-year-old and his two friends. "Sirius Black," he said. "I'll find out what I can." She looked at him and the expression came back, the one that was too large for its components. "You're extraordinary," she said quietly. "I'm just paying attention," he said. "Most people don't," she said. "That's what extraordinary means." He sat with her a little longer and then said he'd come back, and she said she'd be here, and he went because the rest of the day needed dealing with. He found Ron and Hermione in the common room and told them about Sirius Black in 4 sentences. Hermione immediately went for the library. Ron sat up very straight. "I know that name," Ron said. "My parents talk about it sometimes, late at night when they think we're asleep. He was in Gryffindor, a year ahead of your parents. They say he's dangerous. They say he's a Death Eater," Harry said. "Yeah. He didn't have a trial," Harry said. Ron stared at him. "He's been in Azkaban for 10 years without a trial?" "Apparently." Ron seemed to be searching for a word and arriving at the only one that fit. "That's wrong," he said. "Yeah," Harry said. "That's wrong." He let it sit for now. One thing at a time. The afternoon was the interesting kind of chaotic that Hogwarts specialized in. By Saturday afternoon, the news from Friday had completed its full cycle through the school's social metabolism, the initial shock, the factions forming, the arguments becoming slightly more sophisticated as people had time to develop their positions. The Slytherin common room had reportedly been very loud overnight, according to a fifth-year Hufflepuff who lived near it and had filed this report with Ron in passing. Several older Gryffindors had apparently gotten into a shouting match with several older Slytherins in the corridor outside the library, which Hermione reported with disapproval and Ron reported with a level of detail that suggested he'd been closer to it than the library. Harry himself attracted an interesting spread of reactions as he moved through the castle. Most students were visibly recalibrating, you could see it in how they looked at him, the old deference to fame shifting into something different, something more like genuine interest, like they were seeing him rather than the story they'd been given about him. He preferred that. He'd always preferred being seen clearly to being seen at all, which was something the compulsion charms had probably helped manage. Now that he thought about it, the impulse to make himself smaller in the face of his own reputation. He caught Neville in the corridor outside the library and fell into step beside him. "How are you doing?" Harry said. Neville looked mildly surprised at the question, which told Harry something. "Fine," he said automatically, then seemed to catch himself. "Actually, I've been thinking about something." "Is that all right?" "Obviously," Harry said. "The charm," Neville said. "The self-esteem one. The one that was on you." He pulled at his sleeve. "My gran, she talks about me differently than she talks about my dad. About how he was. She says things like, 'You're not what your father was,' and she doesn't mean it cruelly, exactly, he stopped. Harry waited. "I'm just wondering if people just do that," Neville said. "Tell children they're less than they are. Or if it's sometimes something else." Harry looked at him. He didn't have a clean answer for this, because the honest answer was both, and the bothness of it was something that needed to be held without letting one side make the other less true. "Some people do it on purpose," Harry said. "With spells, in my case. Some people do it without meaning to, just because they're scared or grieving or don't know how to handle what a person actually is." He paused. "Your gran is grieving your dad and your mum, and she's afraid of losing you too, and she probably doesn't have good language for any of that, so it comes out sideways." He paused again. "It's still not okay. But it's different." Neville looked at him for a moment. "How do you know about her being afraid of losing me?" "Because if she didn't love you she wouldn't care enough to be afraid," Harry said. "And if she wasn't afraid she'd let you be more than you are, because afraid people shrink things to keep them close. Neville walked alongside him in silence for a few steps. Then he said, very quietly, I can do things. Magical things. Herbology especially, but other things too. He stopped. I know, Harry said. You don't, Neville, Harry said. In flying practice you went up before Hooch gave the signal because your broom felt your magic and wanted to fly. That broom was responding to something. He looked at him. The broom was right. Neville pulled his sleeve again, but this time he stopped halfway through the motion and put his hand back at his side. Okay, he said. Okay, Harry agreed. They went separate ways at the library door. Harry went in and found Hermione at a table near the back with 4 books about Azkaban prison and one about wizarding criminal law and an expression of concentrated fury. There are 237 documented cases of Azkaban prisoners held without trial, she said, without looking up. Sirius Black is the most high-profile, but he's not unique. The Ministry used the post-Voldemort chaos as cover to send people directly to prison without standard judicial procedure and never went back to audit it. 237, Harry said. At minimum, she said. And the thing is, she looked up and her eyes were bright with the particular light she got when she'd found something genuinely important. The thing is that under the Wisingamot Charter, any prisoner who was held without trial has the right to a review upon application to the full court. At any time. The right doesn't expire. Has anyone applied for Sirius Black? No, she said. Can I apply for him? Harry said. She blinked. You're a minor. I'm the heir to the Potter family, apparently, Harry said. According to Gringotts. Does that change the calculation? Hermione stared at him and then turned back to her books with the focused urgency of someone who has found their next project. Let me find out, she said. He left her to it and went to find Ron, who had spent the afternoon playing a game of chess with himself in the common room and had, apparently, won, which said something about his internal chess board that he seemed more impressed than disturbed by. Firebrace took 12 today, Harry told him. Ron put down his knight. How many's that total? 22. 32 to go, Ron said. He'd been keeping count too, Harry had noticed. Ron kept count of the things that mattered to him. How do you feel? I was going to say fine, Harry said, but that's not quite accurate. What's accurate, then? Harry sat down opposite him and looked at the chessboard without seeing it. You know when you've been carrying something heavy for a long time and you put it down and your arms feel strange? Not just lighter, but empty in a way that takes getting used to. Yeah, Ron said. That's what it's like, Harry said. Except it's not empty for long. It fills back up pretty quickly. He paused. With me. Ron looked at him and the look had a quality of attention that Ron mostly kept hidden behind the casual, comfortable ease of his manner. Is that good? Very, Harry said. Ron nodded, satisfied, and picked up his knight again. Hermione found something about Sirius Black. The right to a review, Harry said. She's checking if I can apply. Your dad's best friend, Ron said. Allegedly wrongly imprisoned, Harry said. Ron thought about this. If you get him out, I don't know yet if I can, Harry said. Or should. I don't know what he is. My mum's portrait had doubts about the betrayal story but she didn't have certainty. He paused. I want to know first. Then decide. That's very sensible, Ron said. Don't sound so surprised. I'm not surprised, Ron said. I've just been doing the sensible thing too and I'm not used to being sensible, it feels weird. Harry laughed. It came out real and loose and slightly startled him. He'd been laughing more since the charms started coming off. Not performing laughter, which he'd gotten reasonably good at over the years, but the real kind, the kind that arrives without preparation. Sunday was quieter, or as quiet as the castle could manage after the week it had had. Harry did his homework in the morning, genuinely, all of it, because the work was actually interesting now that his concentration wasn't leaking through invisible holes, and practiced Quidditch in the afternoon, because Wood had booked the pitch for a full team practice and appeared to be vibrating with tactical urgency. Harry flew the Nimbus 2000 for 2 hours in the snow and felt the particular joy of it with every part of himself, no suppression, no automatic dialing back of how much he let himself love this, just, the broom and the cold air and the high clear sky and his magic streaming behind him like a banner. Wood watched him complete a dive from 400 feet that ended with Harry landing smoothly 10 yards from the ground, and said, in a voice that was almost reverent, "We're going to win every match this year." "We're going to try," Harry said, which was more honest. "With that," Wood said, pointing at Harry's trajectory, "we're going to win." Monday arrived with Umbridge. She came in a ministry carriage that arrived at the front gates at 9 in the morning and was visible from the Gryffindor table during breakfast, a small carriage, black, with the ministry seal on its side, and out of it stepped a woman who was short and wide and dressed in a pink cardigan that managed to be aggressively cheerful in the specific way of things that are trying to make you feel something you don't feel. She walked into the school with a deliberateness that said she'd been looking forward to this, and Harry watched her through the window and thought about what McGonagall had said, a bureaucrat of the most committed variety. He'd deal with Umbridge the way he'd dealt with everything this week. Directly, with facts, without anger that wasn't his to spend. She was introduced to the school at breakfast, briefly, by McGonagall, who managed to convey with her tone that she was performing this duty exactly as required and not 1 degree beyond. Umbridge said she was there in the spirit of cooperation and care and used the word stability and community 3 times in 30 seconds, and Harry looked at her from his seat at the Gryffindor table and identified her immediately. She wasn't stupid. That was the important thing. She was politically intelligent in the specific way of people who have risen through bureaucracies. She knew how institutions worked, how to use structure as a weapon, how to make control look like care. She was also, he thought, someone who needed compliance in the way some people needed air, who found independent thinking genuinely threatening in a way that had nothing to do with ideology and everything to do with control. She looked at him during her introduction. Her smile was fixed and her eyes were very sharp. He nodded at her, politely, the way you nod at someone you recognize as a legitimate professional in their field. Her smile flickered slightly. She'd expected something else. He went back to his toast. "She looked at you," Ron said. "I know," Harry said. "She's going to come after you," Hermione said. "She's going to try," Harry said. "But she doesn't have anything. The charges against Dumbledore are real. The evidence is Gringotts certified. The Accords are older than the Ministry. She can put me in detention, technically, but she can't undo a warrant." He sipped his juice. "The only power she has over me is the kind I give her." Hermione looked at him for a moment. "Who taught you to think like that?" "Nobody," Harry said. "I worked it out. Then, or maybe the charm suppressing it is just gone." The first day with Umbridge in the building had a particular texture. She sat in on 2 lessons, not Harry's, as it happened, a 3rd-year charms class and a 5th-year defense class, and spoke to several students in the corridors in a way that looked friendly and wasn't. She set up an office near the deputy head's corridor with a speed that suggested she'd had it planned before she arrived, and by afternoon there were 2 framed ministry proclamations on the castle notice boards, one about the importance of regulated educational oversight and one about appropriate student-staff communication protocols. Harry read both of them and found exactly what he'd expected, vague language designed to have maximum flexibility in application, drafted by someone who understood that the power was in the interpretation. He wrote down the specific phrases that would need contesting and slid the paper to Hermione at dinner. She read it, added 3 annotations, and slid it back. That evening, Harry went back to room 302. His mother was reading again, or performing reading, the way portrait subjects did when they were waiting but wanted to seem occupied. She looked up when he came in. "Tell me about Severus Snape," Harry said, sitting down. She looked at him for a long moment. "Why?" "9 charms," Harry said. "I need to understand why." She set down her portrait book. Her expression moved through something complicated. Severus was my friend, she said. From when we were 9. Before Hogwarts. He was the first magical person I ever knew, except that I didn't know I was magical yet either. She paused. He told me what I was. He was kind, when kindness cost him a lot, because his home was very different from mine and kindness wasn't something he had models for. Another pause. We were close for 6 years. Then things went wrong, the way they go wrong between people when one of them is very angry at the world and the other one has options and the angry one doesn't. 7th year, Harry said. 5th, actually, she said. He called me something I won't repeat in front of you, and that was the end of it. But, she looked at the painted garden beyond her shoulders, the summer greens. He loved me, in his way. Even afterward. He joined Voldemort and then came back from it, and your father and I had you, and she shook her head. I think the 9 charms were his version of watching over you. Which makes them better intentioned and equally wrong. He was watching over me by suppressing me. Harry said. He was watching over you the way someone watches over something they love and are also afraid of, she said. He was afraid of what you'd become. He was afraid of what Voldemort would do when you became it. She looked at Harry directly. He was afraid he'd lose you the way he lost me. Harry sat with that. It was an explanation, not an excuse, and the difference mattered. He turned it over carefully. Does he know this? He asked. That he was afraid? She almost smiled. Severus Snape has spent his entire adult life very carefully not knowing his own motivations. Is that why he's cruel to me in class? You look like James, she said. And Severus spent 20 years hating James Potter with everything he had because James Potter had me and he didn't. She paused. He hates you because you look like someone he chose to hate, and he loves you because you look like someone he chose to love, and he can't separate those things, so it comes out as contempt. Harry looked at the painted summer garden. A painted bird sat on a painted branch, very still, waiting for nothing. When the investigation concludes and they come for him, he said, I'm going to say something. What? I don't know yet, Harry said. Something true. She looked at him and the expression was back, the one too large for its components, and she said, your father would have gone in wand blazing and then regretted it later. You're already better at this than he was. I had more reason to learn, Harry said, which was honest. She nodded, and the nod acknowledged everything in that sentence. He left room 302 in the early evening and walked back through the castle as the torches came up for the night and the last daylight went out of the high windows. He passed Snape in the corridor near the dungeons, which was not planned, they were both heading in opposite directions and there was no avoiding it. They stopped, because the corridor was narrow. Harry looked at Snape. Snape looked at Harry. The 9 charms were in the air between them like a specific kind of weather, and Snape's face had the quality of someone who was very deliberately not flinching, not because he had nothing to flinch from but because flinching required acknowledging what was there. Professor, Harry said. Mr. Potter, Snape said. Harry stepped to the side to let him pass. He did not hurry it. He did not make it a test, or a confrontation, or a statement. He just stepped aside and waited, and Snape walked past him with the controlled precision of a man managing a very large internal situation with very small external movements. Firebrace takes the next cluster on Wednesday, Harry said, to Snape's back. Snape stopped walking. I thought you should know the timeline, Harry said. Because some of those will be yours. A very long pause. Yes, Snape said, without turning around. I'm aware. He walked on. Harry watched him go, and then walked on himself, and by the time he reached the Gryffindor common room the sky outside was fully dark and the snow on the grounds was bright and undisturbed, and Ron had made tea by some miracle of kitchen proximity, there was a mug waiting on the table by his usual chair, and Hermione was writing a letter that she sealed while he was watching and addressed to Gringotts regarding the legal standing of minor heirs in review applications. Well, she said. Wednesday, Harry said. The next cluster, she said. And then the session after that, and then the last one, he said. He picked up the tea. It was exactly the right temperature, which Ron managed by instinct with tea in the same way he managed tactics in chess. And then I'm just me. You're already just you, Hermione said. More of me, he said. More of you, she agreed, and went back to her letter. The fire was warm and the snow was silent outside and the tea was perfect, and Harry sat in the good reliable fact of his friends and felt 32 remaining charms like 32 remaining doors, all of them about to open, and behind them the full unmediated truth of himself, enormous, awake, and entirely his own. Chapter 5 Enemies with Better Reasons. The thing about Quirrell was that he smiled too carefully. Harry had been watching him for weeks with the peripheral attention he gave to things that hadn't resolved into something he could name yet, and the careful smile was the detail that kept surfacing. It was the smile of someone who had constructed a face for public use and wore it the way you wear a coat, deliberately, with awareness of it being a thing you could take off. Most people's smiles were just smiles. Quirrell's was architecture. Wednesday's session with Firebrace took 14 charms. 8 from the third monitoring cluster and 6 from the remaining compulsion group, including the one that Ragnarok had labeled as the ambition suppressor, which released with a force that blew the dampening rods over and sent Pomfrey's carefully relocated potions cabinet rattling against the wall and refilled it from scratch with the particular magical thoroughness of someone who had a very great deal to say after a very long time of being told to be quiet about it. Harry sat in the aftermath of it with his hands in his lap and felt himself think. It was the only way to describe it. He felt himself think, felt the movement of thought with a clarity that he hadn't had before, as though his mind had been operating behind a pane of frosted glass and the glass was now simply gone. He thought about 7 things simultaneously and they didn't tangle, they organized themselves with a natural hierarchy, the most important at the front, the others arrayed behind it with their relative weights clear and readable. The most important thing, currently, was Quirrell. The vault, he said to Firebrace, who was closing his instrument case with the methodical precision of someone completing a procedure. The anonymous vault. Ragnarok mentioned the investigation was ongoing. Firebrace looked at him. It is. Do you know yet? I am not at liberty to share investigative findings before they are formally reported, Firebrace said, which was a very precise non-answer, and Harry filed it under yes, they know, they're waiting for the legal formality. Is it someone currently in this building? Harry asked. Firebrace closed the case. I would recommend, he said, without inflection, being alert. Harry nodded. Wednesday session, done, he said. What's next? Saturday, Firebrace said. 12 remaining. I'll take 8. Then a final session the following Wednesday for the last 4. The deep core ones. He paused. Those will be significant. More significant than today. Firebrace looked at the overturned dampening rods. Yes, he said simply, and left. Harry walked out of the hospital wing thinking about Quirrell and the third-floor corridor and the fact that something had shifted in the last 48 hours that he couldn't entirely account for. The castle felt it too, he could feel the castle now, with the monitoring cluster gone, a background awareness that was not quite communication and not quite nothing, the way you sense a large room even in the dark. The castle was old and saturated with magic and it had opinions, if opinions was even the right word, about what was happening within it. It was unsettled. Something on the 3rd floor was making it unsettled. He went to find Hermione and Ron. He found them in the library, which had become their default operational base for reasons that were partly Hermione's gravitational pull toward books and partly the practical reality that it had tables large enough to spread things out, and Madam Pants, once she'd decided Harry was a serious user and not a casual browser, left them alone with a professionalism that he appreciated. 3rd floor corridor, Harry said, sitting down. Ron looked up from the legal document Hermione had pulled from somewhere about minor error applications. What about it? Something's there, Harry said. Something the castle doesn't like. We know Dumbledore moved something into Hogwarts at the start of term, we know because Hagrid mentioned Gringotts' business on Harry's birthday, and we know Dumbledore moved whatever it was here because a vault at Gringotts was broken into the same day. Vault 713, Hermione said, without looking up. She'd been tracking this thread since October. The vault that was emptied the same day Hagrid and I visited, Harry said. Dumbledore arranged the move. Hagrid made the pickup. Whatever was in that vault is now in this castle. He looked at them both. And it's on the 3rd floor. The restricted corridor, Ron said. Right. Hermione put down the legal document. Fluffy's guarding it, she said. The 3-headed dog. I looked into it, that's Hagrid's, he acquired it from a Greek chap. The question is what Fluffy is guarding specifically. Something valuable enough to move from Gringotts, Harry said. Something Dumbledore considered important enough to hide in a school. The Philosopher's Stone, Hermione said. Ron and Harry both looked at her. She had the expression of someone who has been waiting for the right moment to deploy a conclusion. Nicholas Flamel, she said. I've been trying to place the name since I heard it mentioned by Dumbledore in October, he said it to Snape, I overheard it on the 3rd floor. I found Flamel last night in a footnote in a history of alchemy in magical Britain. He's 665 years old. He made the Philosopher's Stone. It produces the elixir of life, which is why he's 665 years old. She paused. The stone was being kept at Gringotts. Now it's here. Why here? Ron said. Dumbledore thought it was safer, Harry said. Before his arrest, that logic made sense, nobody would dare try to steal from a school he controlled. Now that he's gone and the school is in flux, he stopped. Someone might try, Hermione said. Someone who wants it might try, Harry said. And that someone might already be in this building. Ron looked between them. Quirrell, he said. The careful smile, Harry said. His classroom smells like garlic, Ron said. He told everyone it was to ward off a vampire. But there aren't any vampires at Hogwarts, and the garlic isn't in his classroom, it's around his head specifically, the turban, Hermione said, sitting very straight. Something's under the turban, Harry said. The 3 of them were quiet for a moment, and the library was quiet around them, the comfortable academic quiet of late afternoon, books and dust and the occasional scratch of a quill from a student 2 tables away. Voldemort, Ron said. He said the name steadily, which Harry noted with quiet satisfaction. The flinch was still there but the name came out. Not a full body, Harry said. He doesn't have one. But some form of possession, or attachment. Something that makes Quirrell smell like decay under the garlic and look at me like he's counting down to something. He's been counting down to the stone, Hermione said. Getting past the defenses on the 3rd floor. There are multiple protections, the dog, then presumably other things. She paused. The question is whether he's ready to move or whether Dumbledore's arrest has changed his timeline. It's changed it, Harry said. Dumbledore being gone removes one of the primary deterrents. Quirrell will see an opening. So will we, Ron said. Harry looked at him. Ron shrugged. Obviously we're not going to wait for him to get there first, he said, with the practical tone of someone who has already completed this particular decision and is past the deliberation stage. Harry thought about Ragnarok's advice, avoid confrontational situations until the removal is complete. 4 charms left. 4 more sessions. He thought about Quirrell's careful smile and the castle's unease and the stone sitting behind a 3-headed dog on the 3rd floor and Voldemort, whatever was left of him, pressing against the back of a nervous professor's skull. Not tonight, Harry said. We go in prepared. What does prepared look like? Ron said. It looks like knowing what's in that corridor, Harry said. All of it. The dog we know. But there will be other defenses, and we need to know what they are. He looked at Hermione. I'll find out, she said, which was not a boast, just a statement of fact. Also, Harry said, we should talk to McGonagall. Hermione and Ron both looked at him with slight surprise, which he found interesting. He hadn't exactly established a pattern of deferring to authority, but McGonagall had earned a particular category of his trust by being honest with him when she could have managed him instead. She'd told him things she didn't have to tell him. That was worth reciprocating. She needs to know Quirrell is compromised, Harry said. Not because I need her permission to do anything. But because she's running this school and she deserves to have accurate information. And if she tries to stop you? Ron said. Then I'll explain why she can't, Harry said, and she'll probably agree with me. Thursday and Friday moved with the controlled urgency of a held breath. Harry attended his lessons and ate his meals and flew in the late afternoon when the snow had stopped and the pitch was cold and wide and empty, and between all of this he was building a picture, piece by piece, through what Hermione found in the library and what he observed directly and what the castle told him in its indirect way, of what was on the third floor. Hermione was extraordinary. He needed to say that, at least to himself, with appropriate emphasis. She found things that shouldn't have been findable, synthesized them from multiple sources in different sections of a very large library, and presented them in organized formats that he could use. By Thursday evening she had identified, with reasonable confidence, the likely protections on the stone: the three-headed dog, a devil's snare plant, a flying key challenge, a life-size chess set, a logic puzzle involving potions, and a mirror that showed the heart's truest desire. The mirror is the final defense, she said. The mirror of Erist. Someone pure of heart, someone who wants the stone but not to use it, sees themselves holding it in the mirror, and it appears in their pocket. So if you go in wanting to use the stone, Harry said, the mirror doesn't give it to you. It's an elegant protection, she said. Flammels, presumably, Harry said. The others are teacher's work, Sprout for the devil's snare, probably Flitwick for the keys, McGonagall for the chess. Snape for the potion's logic, Hermione said. Quirrell for the three-headed dog, Harry said, which means he already knows how to get past his own protection. Music sends the dog to sleep. He designed his own obstacle with a built-in bypass, Ron said. That's either very stupid or very confident, Harry said. He was always going to be the one going for it. He didn't need the first obstacle to stop anyone except casual intruders. He went to McGonagall's office Thursday evening, knocked, and was admitted. She was working through what appeared to be a considerable stack of administrative correspondence with the focused displeasure of someone managing someone else's backlog. Mr. Potter, she said. I need to tell you something, he said, and sat, and told her. He told her about Quirrell, the observations, the smell, the turban, the way the man watched him, the counting down quality of his attention. He told her about the Philosopher's Stone and the corridor and the logical conclusion of Quirrell's trajectory now that Dumbledore's arrest had removed the building's primary deterrent. He told her all of it cleanly and in order, without drama, the way you tell someone facts when you need them to act on the facts rather than the feeling. McGonagall listened. Her expression moved through several stages, and Harry tracked them: initial doubt, consideration, the specific recalibration of someone finding that the evidence fits, and then the set jaw and the straight back of someone who has decided. I'll contact the Aurors, she said. When? Harry said. Tomorrow morning. He might move tonight, Harry said. She looked at him. You cannot go into that corridor, Mr. Potter. I'm not planning to tonight, Harry said. But if he moves before you've gotten the Aurors, and if he gets to the stone, he stopped. The mirror will stop him, if his heart's desire is to use it. But I don't know that Voldemort's desire is to use it. Voldemort wants to survive. That's different from wanting to use the stone for power or wealth. The desire might be, pure enough, in its own way, to get the mirror to respond. McGonagall was very still. That is an astute distinction, she said. Contact the Aurors tonight, Harry said. Please. She looked at him for a beat. Then she reached for her quill. Tonight, she said. Thank you, Harry said, stood up, and left. He slept well. His magic was a warm and steady presence as he went under, 40 charms gone, 14 remaining, his core clean and wide and settled in him like something that had always been waiting to be let in. He dreamed about flying but couldn't remember the specifics when he woke. Friday passed. The aura response, McGonagall told him at breakfast with the manner of someone delivering a professional update, was that 2 auras would be sent to Hogwarts by Saturday. By Saturday meant not tonight, not tomorrow morning, but Saturday evening, which was not fast enough given the pressure Harry could feel building in the castle, in Quirrell's manor, in the specific way the 3rd floor felt when he walked past the staircase that led to it. Saturday morning, Firebrace arrived for the 8th session. 8 more. That left 4, Deep Core, for the final Wednesday session. The 8th Firebrace took Saturday included 3 more monitoring charms and 5 from a cluster he described as behavioral reinforcement anchors, the charms that had worked on Harry's instinct to question his circumstances, to push back against things that were wrong, to reach for what was his. They came out one after another over the course of an hour, each one releasing with a particular quality of relief that was more emotional than physical, the way you feel relief when you put a thing you've been dreading in its right words and find that the right words make it smaller. When the last of the 8 released, Harry sat in the hospital wing and felt 30 years of accumulated magical potential that had never been allowed to fully exist running through his system like clean water after long drought, and he thought, very clearly, with no hesitation and no qualification, I'm ready. He wasn't arrogant about it. Arrogance required ego investment in being seen as powerful, and Harry didn't much care about being seen. He just knew, with the diagnostic precision of someone who has spent weeks learning to read his own magical signature, that what he was now, with 14 still remaining but 40 removed, was already considerably more than most people would know what to do with, and what he'd be after Wednesday was something that probably didn't have a good contemporary reference point. He walked out of the hospital wing at 11 in the morning with the specific intention of finding Ron and Hermione, and found instead the entire corridor outside the hospital wing crowded with students and a smell coming from the direction of the 3rd floor that was sharp and wrong and magical in the particular way of something that had been activated abruptly. The corridor smelled like the door to somewhere was open. Harry, Ron said, appearing from the crowd with Hermione at his side, both of them looking up the corridor with the focused attention of people who have been waiting for exactly this to happen. It's Quirrell. He left his classroom during a lesson, just walked out, mid-sentence, didn't dismiss anyone. Someone saw him heading to the 3rd floor. Harry looked up the corridor. Students were clustering and whispering, some starting to follow the direction of the smell, others hanging back. He looked at Hermione. The Aurors aren't here yet, she said. McGonagall, he said. Gone to find out what's happening, Ron said. 2 minutes ago. She might already be, she might be behind him, not ahead of him, Harry said. He thought about the stone and Quirrell's careful smile and Voldemort pressing against the skull of a man who had already been compromised for years and had nothing left to hold Voldemort back from the final push. He thought about what the stone in Voldemort's hands would mean, not abstractly, not as a chess problem, but actually, in the real world where people lived and his parents had died and Neville's parents were in a hospital and Sirius Black was in Azkaban without trial. He thought about what it would mean for all of those specific people if Voldemort got a body back. I'm going, he said. We know, Ron said, already moving. You don't have to, Harry said. Harry, Ron said, if you say that again I'm going to be offended. Hermione was already 3 steps ahead. The 3rd floor corridor was empty when they arrived, the students not having followed this far, the door to the restricted section standing open with the quality of a door that has been opened with magic rather than a hand. It was listing slightly on its hinges, the lock mechanism dissolved. Through it the smell was stronger, that sharp wrong magical smell with something underneath it that Harry's newly clean magic identified as old and dark and hungry. Fluffy's door was open too. From inside, the sound of something very large breathing in deep slow sleep. Music, Harry said, and they went through. The devil's snare was in a chamber beyond the dog room, a massive, tendrilled thing that Hermione identified from its shape and reached upward with muscular enthusiasm. Harry had his wand in his hand and cast Incendio before it got Ron's arm properly, the fire blooming orange in the dark space, and the devil's snare recoiled with the rapid distaste of a plant that has been surprised by something it dislikes very much. They moved through it quickly, Hermione talking them through the pressure points, and came out the other side breathing harder and into a room full of keys. Hundreds of them, small and glinting, circling the ceiling like a slow mechanical storm, and a broom in the corner, and a locked door. Harry looked at the keys for approximately 4 seconds and identified the right one. There was one with a bent wing, recently bent. Someone had used it already and stressed the mechanism, and took the broom and went up and came back with it in under 20 seconds, and unlocked the door, and they went through. The chess set. Life-size pieces, white facing them, black arranged on the far side, and beyond the black pieces another door, and on the floor the faint marks of someone else's passage. Quirrell had been here, moved through, but the chess set was resetting, the pieces returning to their positions after each game, the castle's magic maintaining the integrity of the obstacle. "I'll play," Ron said immediately. Harry looked at the board and at Ron and thought about the specific and absolute nature of Ron's chess ability, which was not something Ron talked about because it was not the kind of thing Ron had been raised to talk about, but which Harry had observed over 8 weeks of near-daily chess games in the common room and which was, bluntly, extraordinary. Ron didn't play chess. Ron thought in chess, the way some people thought in music or mathematics, the game's logic running naturally through his processing and producing moves that weren't memorized patterns but genuine creative tactics. "Play," Harry said. Ron sat in the knight's place, Harry and Hermione took knight and bishop, and the game began. It lasted 11 minutes. Ron played with a cold-focused elegance that Harry had glimpsed before in the common room but never seen fully deployed, each move precisely placed, the black pieces advancing with the aggressive confidence of an opponent who had stood against many players, and Ron reading them 2 moves ahead, 3 moves ahead, the board's future as visible to him as its present. Harry moved when Ron told him to move and didn't second-guess it, and Hermione did the same, and when the Queen advanced on Ron in the endgame move that was the sacrifice the position required, Ron looked at it with the absolute steadiness of someone who has already made his choice and is at peace with it. "Take me," he told the Queen. "It opens the king." "Ron," Hermione started. "Hermione," Ron said, with the particular patience of someone who can see the whole board and knows there's only one way. "Check." The Queen swept forward. Ron hit the stone floor and didn't move, breathing but still, and Harry felt something cold and sharp in his chest and looked at the Black King and felt his magic and thought finish it and moved forward, and the Black King tipped in surrender with the sound of heavy stone on stone. "Checkmate," Harry said. The pieces cleared. The door beyond opened. He went back to Ron, who was dazed but conscious, blinking at the ceiling with the mildly confused expression of someone whose brain is coming back online after a hard stop. "I'm fine," Ron said, to the ceiling. "You're brilliant," Harry said. "I know," Ron said. "Go. We'll be fine. I'll get Hermione back through." "I'm not leaving you," Hermione said. "There's an injured person here," Ron said, in a reasonable tone, "and someone needs to stay with them." "That's you." Harry goes. He looked at Harry. "Go." Harry looked at both of them. "If I'm not back in 20 minutes, go get McGonagall." 10 minutes, Hermione said. 15, Harry said, and went. The potion room was all the things Hermione had described: 7 bottles, a logic puzzle, a line of fire behind and in front, darkness on either side, a riddle that confirmed what he'd worked out from the temperature of the bottles before he'd finished reading it. He drank the smallest bottle, the correct one, felt the cold of it spread down his chest, and went through the fire. And there was the mirror. And in front of the mirror, Quirrell. The room was circular and lit with a cold blue that came from nowhere specific, and the mirror stood against the far wall, tall, arch-topped, with the inscription Eris stra eru oit ube kafru oit on Wosi running along the top in reverse, and in it Harry could see Quirrell's reflection staring back at Quirrell's face with an expression of furious confusion, because the mirror wasn't showing him what he needed to see. Quirrell turned when Harry came through the fire. The careful smile was gone. His face, without it, was a different face entirely, thin and frightened, and underneath the fear something that had been living in him long enough to wear grooves into him, something that looked out through his eyes with a hunger that was older than his fear and colder than the room. "Potter," Quirrell said. "Quirrell," Harry said. He walked into the room and didn't stop. Quirrell's wand was out and Harry's was in his hand, and the space between them was about 15 feet, and Harry looked at the mirror and at Quirrell and understood the situation with complete clarity. Quirrell couldn't get the stone because the mirror read his desire to give it to Voldemort and withheld it. He needed someone else to get it. He needed, specifically, someone who wanted the stone but not to use it. Quirrell raised his wand. Petrificus, Harry deflected it. Not a block, he hadn't cast a protego, he hadn't cast anything. His magic simply moved, the way a hand moves to deflect something thrown at your face, instinctive and total, and the Petrificus totalis hit the wall to his left and the stone charred where it struck. Quirrell looked at his wand. Then at Harry. "You're 11 years old," he said, and this time it wasn't dismissal, it was the specific recalculation of someone who has been working with a false model. "You keep using that like it means something," Harry said, and walked toward the mirror. Incendio, Harry's free hand came up and the fire died. He felt it happen through him, his magic reaching out and simply cancelling the spell the way you turn off a tap, and Quirrell's face went through 3 expressions in 2 seconds, the last one something that lived very close to terror. "The stone is mine, Potter," said a voice. Not Quirrell's voice. Something underneath it, behind it, a voice that carried the specific weight of something that had been preserving itself past its natural end, thin and cold and full of the particular hunger of things that have traded humanity for longevity and found the trade degrading. Harry had never heard this voice before and knew it immediately. "No," Harry said, simply. "Kill him." Quirrell moved, and this time he wasn't reaching for his wand, he was reaching for Harry with his hands, with the physical force of a man driven by something that had commandeered his body's last resources, and Harry didn't step back. He stood, and when Quirrell's hands found his arms, the magic in Harry moved. He didn't tell it to. He didn't cast. He didn't shape the magic into anything with a wand movement or a word. It was purely his presence, his magic, unfiltered and direct and 40 charms lighter than it had been 6 weeks ago, and where Quirrell's skin met his, something happened. Quirrell screamed. His hands came away leaving behind the sensation of something burning, not from Harry but from the contact, as though Harry's magic was incompatible with what was inhabiting Quirrell the way 2 magnetic poles of the same charge are incompatible, and Quirrell's face contorted and he grabbed at his own hands with an expression of horrified realization. "His touch burns you," said the voice from under the turban, and it sounded less like Voldemort now and more like something calculating its remaining options at a pace that left no room for panic. "The blood protection. The sacrifice. Get the..." Harry walked to the mirror. He stood in front of it and looked at his reflection. His reflection looked back, green-eyed and steady, and then its expression shifted, changed, and in the mirror his reflection smiled and opened its hand, and in its palm was a small red stone, faceted, catching the blue light of the room. And the stone appeared in his pocket. He felt it arrive, a small solid weight, warm against his side, the magic of it resonating against his own like a key in a lock. He turned from the mirror. Quirrell was kneeling on the floor, his hands wrapped in his robes, rocking slightly, the quality of his pain not from his hands alone, he looked like someone being eaten from the inside, something consuming the last of his structural integrity. The turban had come loose and Harry looked away from what he saw there because knowing it was Voldemort and seeing it were different things and he allowed himself 1 second of different things before he closed his face and looked only at Quirrell the man. "It doesn't have to end here," Harry said to Quirrell. To the man. "You can still, don't be sentimental," said the voice. "I'm not talking to you," Harry said. The silence in the room had a quality of genuine surprise. "Quirinus Quirrell," Harry said, and his voice was even, and it was for the man, for whoever was still in there under the possession and the years of terror and the terrible bargain he'd made. "Gringotts has records of your vault activity. They will find what you carried into this country. You have a chance to give them what they need, and they can separate what's been done to you from what you did." He paused. I'm not going to tell you it's nothing. But I'm telling you there's a difference. Quirrell looked at him. His eyes were frightened and layered, and for a moment, one fractional moment, the careful face was gone, and beneath it was not Voldemort's hunger but something else, smaller, older, just a man who had been afraid for a very long time and had made the worst possible choice out of that fear. Potter, said the voice of Voldemort, very quietly, with the particular quality of something that has understood a threat, give me the stone. No, Harry said. I will give you power beyond, you'll give me nothing, Harry said. You're sharing a skull with a dying man and you have no body and no wand and no leverage and the Aurors are in this building. He looked at the back of Quirrell's head, at the gap in the turban, at the face pressed there. You're not going to survive this night in this form. And anything you offer is worth exactly what you're worth right now. A pause. You remind me of your mother, Voldemort said. Harry held the stone in his pocket and looked at the ruined shape of Quirrell kneeling on the cold floor and said, good. The door behind him opened. Not the fire door, the far door, the one that led back toward the chess room, and McGonagall came through it at something near a run with 2 Aurors behind her and the composed urgency of someone who had been 15 minutes too late and was managing that fact with everything she had. She took in the room in one sweep, Quirrell on the floor, Harry standing, the mirror, the stone-shaped bulge in Harry's pocket. Her jaw set. She looked at the Aurors and said, secure the subject, and to Harry she said, are you hurt? No, Harry said. The stone. Harry put his hand in his pocket and held it out to her. She looked at it for a moment with the expression of someone looking at something whose implications extend very far in multiple directions. Flamel needs it back, Harry said. And his wife. They've been waiting. McGonagall took the stone and held it with both hands and said nothing for a moment, just stood with it, and behind her the Aurors had Quirrell restrained, one of them performing diagnostic magic and making notes, and the room felt like the moment after something large and fast-moving has stopped. Mr. Potter, McGonagall said. I know, Harry said. You deflected 2 spells without casting. 1.5, he said. The second one I used incendio. She looked at him with the expression she'd been evolving toward for 6 weeks, the one that had started as professional approval and moved through surprise and through complicated emotion and was now arriving somewhere that was simply acknowledgement. Clear-eyed and total. Nicholas Flamel will be informed, she said. The ministry will need a statement. Fine, Harry said. Tonight, she said. Also fine, he said. She looked at the mirror one last time, and then at the door. Come, she said. Let's go see about Mr. Weasley. Ron was sitting up and arguing with Hermione when they came back through the chess room, arguing in the specific, comfortable way of people who are arguing because they're both relieved and have energy to spend on it, which was as diagnostic of his condition as any medical charm. He saw Harry and said, You got it. Got it, Harry said. The stone, Ron said. You actually, McGonagall has it, Harry said. Are you all right? My head hurts and I've got a bruise the size of Wales on my back but I'm fine, Ron said, and let one of the Aurors help him up with the careful dignity of someone who is accepting help while maintaining the position that they don't really need it. Hermione looked at Harry with the library research look, the one that catalogued details. Your hands, she said. He looked at them. The skin on his palms was faintly luminescent, not glowing, exactly, but with a warmth that was visible, a faint residual light from the contact with Quirrell, from his magic having moved through him that completely in the encounter with something dark and hungry. It faded while he watched. In 10 seconds his hands looked normal. What happened, she said. My mother died to protect me, he said. Apparently that leaves a mark. The blood magic kind. He thought about Lily Potter in room 302, sitting in her painted garden, and about the mirror and his reflection's open hand. It's why I could look at the mirror clearly. I didn't want the stone for myself. I wanted to keep it from Voldemort. Hermione nodded, processing, storing, connecting. Also, Harry said, as they walked out of the corridor, following McGonagall and the Aurors with Quirrell between them up through the layers of the castle's defenses, the chess room and the key room and the devil's snare and Fluffy's chamber where the dog was still sleeping in the music dark. I'm fairly sure Dumbledore designed this entire thing. The obstacle course. The mirror. Even Quirrell's involvement, at least partially. I think he knew Quirrell was compromised and kept him here specifically because a Voldemort-possessed professor trying to steal the stone was more useful than a Voldemort-possessed professor at large. He used Quirrell as bait, Hermione said. And the stone as the lure, Harry said. And me as the, he paused. The inevitable response. He knew I'd find out about it. He knew I'd come. Even with his arrest, Hermione said slowly. Maybe especially then, Harry said. He knew the arrest was coming. He felt the charms go silent. He had time to set the conditions and trust the variables. He paused. He believed he'd done enough work on me that I'd behave exactly as intended even after his removal. The castle was quiet around them, the late-night stone and torchlight and the distant sounds of students long in bed. The Aurors moved with professional quiet. McGonagall's footsteps had their usual precision. Did you? Ron said. Behave exactly as intended? Harry thought about it honestly. I got the stone. I stopped Quirrell. Which is what he needed. He turned the stone-shaped absence in his pocket over in his mind. But I did it my way, on my terms, with my people, and I'm giving the stone to Flamel and not to Dumbledore, and after his hearing Dumbledore won't have a school to come back to. He looked at Ron. So. Mostly yes, and entirely no. Ron thought about this. That's about right, he said. They came up through the last staircase and into the main corridor and the night air was cool and clean and above them through the high windows the sky was clear for the first time in a week, stars very sharp in the black, no snow. And Harry looked up at them through the glass and felt the stone warmth that had been in his pocket and the echo of his magic still running through his hands and 40 removed charms and 14 yet to go and a trial coming and a Quidditch match and a man in Azkaban. Without trial and a portrait in room 302 and a world that was very much his to deal with. He thought about Wednesday. About the last 4 charms. About what Firebrace had said, significant. He was already significant. He could only imagine what came next. Above the castle, the stars held. Chapter 6, The boy who chose the 4 remaining charms were the oldest. Firebrace told Harry this on Wednesday morning, setting up his instruments in the hospital wing with the methodical care he brought to everything, placing each dampening rod with more precision than previous sessions, adding 2 additional ones that he hadn't used before, hexagonal rather than cylindrical, larger. Their crystal surfaces etched with patterns that caught the light and refracted it in ways that made the air around them look slightly thicker. The deep core enchantments date from your birth, Firebrace said, without preamble, without the softening that human practitioners sometimes felt necessary. Not 15 months. Birth. Someone was present when you entered the world and placed these in your signature while your magical core was still forming. Harry sat on the bed and looked at him. What do they do? Firebrace picked up his primary diagnostic instrument and turned it in his hands with the attention of someone reading a very small text. The first is a sealing charm. It places an upper limit on how large your magical signature can become. Without it, your core will continue expanding to its natural size. He paused. I want to be clear that I cannot predict with certainty what your natural size is. I can tell you what I observe currently, with 46 removed, and extrapolate. But the sealing charm has been in place since the first second of your existence, which means we have no baseline. We don't know what you actually are. Nobody does, Harry said. No, Firebrace said. Including you. All right, Harry said. The second is a legacy block. It prevents automatic access to inherited magical knowledge. The Potter family has a deep magical legacy, built over generations, and magical heirs can access ancestral knowledge instinctively under certain conditions. This block has been preventing that access. What kind of knowledge? Harry said. Protective magic, primarily. Your family line has a history of defensive specialization. Shield work, blood magic, wards. He paused again. Your mother added to it the night she died. Her sacrifice went into the family magical legacy. The block has been sitting on top of that specifically. Harry was quiet for a moment. The third, Firebrace said, and now there was something in his voice that was the goblin equivalent of careful, the professional precision that handles something significant by handling it precisely, is a soul tether. Ron, who was sitting in the corner again, said, "A what?" "A soul tether," Firebrace repeated. "It's an ancient dark enchantment, classified as illegal under the Accord since 1843 when the amendment was added specifically because of them. It creates a partial magical bond between one soul and another, allowing the dominant soul to leech magical energy from the tethered one over time." He looked at Harry. "You have been providing approximately 12% of your magical output to an external source for your entire life." "Voldemort," Harry said. "We believe so," Firebrace said. "The signature is degraded beyond clean identification, but the anchor point in your core is consistent with attachment to a fragmented soul." Harry sat with that. The ceiling. The legacy block. The soul tether. And a fourth one he hadn't heard yet. "The fourth," Harry said. Firebrace set down the instrument and picked up another one. "The fourth is yours," he said. "It is not, technically, a foreign enchantment. It is more accurate to call it a contained explosion. When your parents died, a fragment of your mother's magic and a fragment of the rebounding killing curse both entered your magical core simultaneously, and they have been, contained, sealed from your access, because allowing a 1-year-old unmediated access to either would have been incompatible with surviving childhood." He paused. "You have, in your core, your mother's sacrifice magic, the same blood protection that burned Quirrell, and a piece of the killing curse that has been sitting there, sealed, for 10 years. The hospital wing was very quiet. "When you remove the seal," Harry said, "both of those come online." "Yes," Firebrace said. "And you don't know what that looks like combined with everything else." "No," Firebrace said. "I don't." He looked at Harry with the steady, direct quality that was as close to warmth as his professional manner came. "I want you to understand what I'm telling you. I am going to remove 4 enchantments today, the last of which will release 2 unintegrated magical elements of unknown combined potency into a core that is already among the most powerful I have measured in 47 years. I cannot guarantee the outcome. I can tell you the dampening rods are the best available and Madam Pomfrey is the finest healer in Britain, and I would not proceed if I thought the risk was unmanageable. But I want your fully informed consent." "You have it," Harry said. Without hesitation, Firebrace observed. "I've been a cage for 11 years, Harry said. "I'm done with the cage." Pomfrey, from the window, said nothing. Her hands were folded in front of her and her face had the expression it had been building toward since the first morning, not anxiety, not anticipation, but a kind of still, professional readiness that was as close to reverence as a medical person in the middle of a procedure could come. Ron leaned forward in his chair. Hermione had come this time, sitting at the far end of the room with Fundamentals of Magical Signature Theory open on her lap, not reading it so much as holding it, which was a thing she did when she needed the comfort of a physical object and the book was the nearest one. She looked at Harry and their eyes met and she nodded once, and it meant everything it needed to mean. Firebrace began. "The sealing charm came off first, and what happened was not sound or light or any of the dramatic visible phenomena of the previous sessions. What happened was that Harry felt himself expand, and the feeling was so comprehensive and so enormous that it bypassed sensation and became something else entirely, a recognition. Like the moment you look at the horizon and understand, in a way you hadn't before, how much space there actually is. His magical core reached outward, upward, in every direction simultaneously, and settled, and it was vast. Not infinitely vast. Not supernatural. But his, and uncapped, and the true measure of it was something that settled into him with the clean authority of a fact coming home. He breathed. The air felt thinner and then normal and then richer, the castle's magic pressing warmly against him from every surface, the old stone and the deep wards and the ancient accumulated magic of 1,000 years recognizing something in him and adjusting itself accordingly, the way a river adjusts around a new rock. "All right?" Firebrace asked. "Yes," Harry said. The legacy block was second. This one felt different from anything before, not a release but an opening, a door swinging inward on a room that had been sealed, and from the room came not sensation but knowledge, though knowledge wasn't quite right either. More like instinct that had been waiting for permission. He knew, suddenly, without having been told, how his mother's blood protection worked at a functional level, the way you know how your hands work, not the theory, the doing of it. He knew the shape of the Potter ward work, the specific geometry of defensive magic that ran through his family line like a structural signature, and it sat in him ready and complete. He felt his mother's sacrifice magic more specifically now, the same warmth that had burned Quirrell but not as a reactive thing, as a woven thing, something built into the foundation of his core the way load-bearing walls are built into a structure. It was ancient and certain and thoroughly hers, and it was also thoroughly his now, and the two things were not contradictory. He closed his eyes for a moment. "Ready?" Firebrace said. "Yes," Harry said, and opened them. The soul tether. The removal of it was the most violent thing that had happened to Harry in the hospital wing and possibly in his life, which said something given the competition. Firebrace worked with extraordinary precision, isolating the anchor point, following the tether's route through the deep tissue of Harry's core the way a surgeon follows a nerve, and the removing of it was not quick. It took 12 minutes, and in those 12 minutes Harry sat absolutely still with his hands flat on his knees and let Firebrace work, feeling the tether come loose incrementally, each increment like a new degree of freedom. When it released completely, the world lurched. Not physically. The room didn't move. But something in Harry's perception shifted with the violence of a pendulum released from restraint. Voldemort's leeching had been so constant and so present for so long that its absence was its own event, and what came back into Harry's core from the removal was not some triumphant flood of power but something quieter and more significant, the full, unshared ownership of himself. Every bit of his magic was his. All of it. For the first time in his entire existence, not one fraction of it was anywhere but in him. He didn't shout or cry or do anything visible. He just sat with it and breathed and let the reality of it settle like sediment finding the bottom of a container. "The fourth," Firebrace said, and his voice was careful in a new way, "the way you are careful at the edge of something you can see is enormous even from a distance." "Are you certain?" "Yes," Harry said. Firebrace placed 3 additional instruments around the bed. He had Pomfrey stand near the window with a cushioning charm already active on the glass. He checked the dampening rods twice. He looked at Harry one final time with the expression of someone who has done everything in his professional power and is now at the edge of the part where the job exceeds the professional. "Hold very still," he said. "Whatever happens, hold still. Your body will want to respond. Let the magic do what it does." "All right," Harry said. "Deep breath." Harry took one. Firebrace removed the seal on the contained fragment of Lily Potter's sacrifice magic and the contained fragment of the killing curse simultaneously, and the hospital wing went white. Not the room. Everything. Harry's awareness expanded in every direction at the speed of something that had been waiting 10 years for permission to be what it was, and the 2 fragments, his mother's love and the killing curse's failed destruction, met in his core and did what they had been doing for a decade in miniature, which was annihilate each other and produce something new. The killing curse's dark energy burned against Lily's sacrifice magic and the sacrifice magic absorbed it and transformed it the way fire transforms wood, and what was left was neither dark nor light but a third thing, a synthesized thing, something that had no name in any magical taxonomy Harry knew. His magic erupted outward. The dampening rods did not explode. They shook and maxed and shook and held, barely, each one vibrating at a frequency that made them look blurred, their crystal surfaces white-hot. Every torch in the hospital wing went out and came back on burning blue-white, as they had before, but brighter, much brighter, the kind of light that doesn't flicker. Every window in the room blew outward simultaneously, the glass vanishing into the grounds as a fine sparkling mist, the November air crashing in cold and sharp. The old stone of the floor cracked in a starburst pattern beneath the bed, not breaking but marking, the magic moving through it like heat through iron. Outside, the grounds. Ron told him afterward what happened to the grounds. The snow that had fallen over the past week lifted entirely, all of it, every flake, rising 12 feet off the ground in a single simultaneous movement and hanging there for approximately 3 seconds in a perfect, ridiculous, impossible snow cloud above the school before settling back down in patterns that nobody could explain and that Hagrid said later looked like, he'd used the word deliberate, and had seemed both delighted and concerned. And then it was over. Harry sat on the bed in the changed hospital wing with its blown-out windows and cracked floor and blue-white torches and 8 max dampening rods and looked at his hands. His hands looked normal. They felt normal. His magic felt normal, except that normal was a concept that was going to need some significant revision, because what he felt now was to what he'd felt last Monday roughly as a full orchestra was to a single instrument, not louder, necessarily, but complete in a way that changed what complete meant. He felt completely, cleanly, entirely himself. "Mr. Potter," Pomfrey said, from the window, looking out at the grounds where the snow was beginning to settle back into its new and inexplicable patterns. "Madam Pomfrey," Harry said. She turned. Her face had the expression of someone who has witnessed something that their professional vocabulary doesn't quite cover and has decided that professional vocabulary can catch up later. "How do you feel?" Harry thought about all the times he'd been asked that question in this room over the past 6 weeks and all the variations of fine and good and better he'd given, each one more accurate than the last, a spectrum of increasing truth. He thought about the honest answer now, the fully honest answer, the one he could give because there were no more charms left to make him moderate himself. "Like myself," he said. "For the first time." She held his gaze for a long moment and then nodded once, and the nod was not medical and not professional, it was simply human and completely adequate, and she went to get her assessment instruments and Harry looked at Hermione and Ron. Ron had both hands pressed flat against his own knees, very still, the way he went still when something hit him hard enough that he needed a moment to process it at full depth. He looked at Harry with bright eyes and didn't say anything for a long moment. Then he said, "The snow went up." "I heard," Harry said. "All of it," Ron said. "Simultaneously. 12 feet. I know." "And then it came back down in patterns," Ron said. "Ron," Hermione said. "I'm just noting it," Ron said, with dignity. "For the record." Hermione looked at Harry and the look was its own complicated thing, proud and precise and warm all at once, the specific look of someone who loves the person in front of them in a way that includes being absolutely clear-eyed about what they are. "How do you feel?" she echoed. "Like I said," Harry said. "Myself." "Good," she said. "Because the Wisingamot hearing is in 2 weeks and you need to be exactly that." The hearing was set for the 14th of December, 2 weeks before Christmas. Fudge had tried twice to have it postponed, first on procedural grounds, then on the grounds of ongoing investigation requiring additional preparation time, and both times the Wisingamot's chief warlock had declined the postponement because the case was built on Gringotts forensic evidence and did not require ministry preparation, and the chief warlock was a woman named Griselda Marchbanks who had been examining students for 80 years and had the institutional memory and the corresponding inflexibility of someone who had seen the ministry try this particular maneuver before. Harry spent the 2 weeks doing several things simultaneously. He visited room 302 every other day. The conversations with his mother's portrait were becoming, not easier, exactly, because easy was not the right frame for them, but more natural, more like talking and less like navigating a profound and beautiful difficulty. She told him about his father's animagus form, a stag, which explained the Patronus that Harry had seen in a dream once and not understood. She told him about the Marauders, about Moony and Wormtail and Padfoot, and when she said Padfoot her voice had a specific quality that said this was someone she trusted and whose story wasn't finished. "Sirius Black is innocent," she said, one afternoon, with the conviction of someone who has spent 10 years arriving at a certainty. I don't have evidence. I can't prove it. But Peter Pettigrew was the secret keeper, not Sirius. Sirius told me, the week before, he said he was switching, that Peter was less obvious, that nobody would suspect Peter. I told James. James agreed. She paused. And then Peter was the one who died, apparently, and Sirius was the one arrested, and the thing about Peter dying is that there was a finger left. One finger. Which means the body was mostly gone, which is, an animagus transformation, Harry said immediately. If Pettigrew was an animagus, a small enough form, he could disappear from an explosion and leave enough behind to look dead. His mother looked at him. Yes, she said. That's what I think too. I filed the review application for Sirius, Harry said. Gringotts helped. As heir to the Potter family I have standing to request a review of a wrongful imprisonment that was conducted without trial. Marchbanks has accepted it. It'll be heard after the Dumbledore hearing. His mother said nothing for a long time. Then she said, Harry. He'll need somewhere to go, Harry said. When he gets out. You can't guarantee, no, he said. But I can make the argument, and I can give the Wisingamot the evidence, and I can find Pettigrew if he's alive, which I think he is. He paused. I have resources now. The family vault is fully accessible. I have a legal team through Gringotts. I have McGonagall and I have Marchbanks and I have Hermione Granger, which frankly is worth more than the rest combined. His mother laughed. It was the first time he'd heard her laugh. The portrait could do it, apparently, and the sound of it was remarkable, warm and genuine and with a specific musical quality that he thought he might have inherited the shape of, and he sat with the fact of having heard it and filed it somewhere important. He went to see Snape. Not in class, he went to Snape's office on a Thursday evening, knocked, and entered when told to, and found the potions professor at his desk in the low torchlight with papers before him and the expression of someone who had been expecting this visit for several weeks and had not yet determined what he was going to do with it. Harry sat in the chair across the desk without being offered it. I'm not going to ask you to explain yourself, Harry said. I've worked out most of it. My mother told me some of it. Snape's expression moved in a way that was almost imperceptible but wasn't, quite. The 9 charms were wrong, Harry said. The self-esteem one, he stopped and started again. That one specifically I want you to understand I'm not going to let go of quietly. That was its own particular kind of cruelty, whatever you intended, and I need you to know I know that. Yes, Snape said, and the word was minimal but it was not evasive, which was something. Gringotts will present their findings at the hearing, Harry said. Your name will be part of the record. What happens after that depends on what you do between now and then. He paused. I'm not here to threaten you. I'm here to tell you that I spoke to the Chief Witch and I said that the case for Snape was contextually different from the case for Dumbledore, and she asked me to explain why, and I explained why, and what she does with that is up to her. He looked at Snape directly. I am not your enemy. I am not your friend. I am someone who is going to tell the truth about what was done to me and let the people responsible for adjudication do their jobs. Snape looked at him for a long moment. He had the expression of someone who has spent decades preparing for attack from a specific direction and has been struck from a completely different one and is recalibrating the entire map. Why? He said. The word was stripped to its minimum, but it was genuine. Because my mother loved you once, Harry said. And I think if she was here, she'd want me to be fair. He paused. I'm not her. But I can try to be fair. The torches in the office were very quiet. Snape's hands on his desk were very still. Mr. Potter, he said, after a silence that was not uncomfortable so much as full, I am not a man who apologizes well. I know, Harry said. But I am, he stopped. Restarted. What was done to you was not, it was not, what I intended was not what resulted. I know, Harry said again. The intentions don't clean it up. But they're different from Dumbledore's, and I'm treating them as different. That's all I can do." He stood up. "Fire brace is done," he said. "All 54 are gone." He looked at Snape one more time. "You won't feel the monitoring connection anymore. In case you were wondering." He left. The Wizengamot hearing was in the Ministry of Magic's courtroom 10, and Harry had been there once before, not in the real past, but in a dream that he understood now was probably a leaked memory fragment from the piece of Voldemort's soul that had sat in his core, because the room was familiar in the way dreams are familiar, the stone walls, the tiered seats, the single chair in the center with its chains, which were currently lying still because the chains were for people who were expected to run, and Dumbledore, seated in the defendant's position, did not appear to be planning to run. He looked, if anything, older than he had. 60 days of whatever Gringotts holding involved had not physically diminished him. He still held himself with the bearing of someone whose sense of personal significance was architectural, but something had changed in him, some quality of certainty. He still believed what he believed. But the room no longer deferred to it automatically, and that changed the weight of it. Harry sat in the witness area between Hermione and Ron. Behind them were McGonagall, Pomfrey, and Firebrace. In the gallery above, packed solid with observers, was half the wizarding world, journalists, ministry officials, members of families connected to the case, and in the back row, watching with the focused attention of someone who has waited for this, Arthur and Molly Weasley. Harry had met the Weasleys properly the week before when Ron had brought him home for a Sunday dinner that had been extraordinary in the way of things that are everything you'd hoped for and also more complicated than you'd hoped. Molly Weasley had hugged him before he'd said a word and fed him 4 courses and asked about his health and his studies, and then, toward the end of the evening, with the fire burning low in the Burrows sitting room, had looked at him with direct and honest eyes and said, "I know Arthur and I are meant to be supportive parents about Ron making his own choices, and I support him, and I think what you've done this term it's right, Harry. I want you to know I think it's right." She'd paused. "I loved what I thought Dumbledore was. That's different from loving what he did." Harry had thought about that for days. Griselda Marchbanks was exactly what a chief witch of the Wizengamot should be, which was to say she was old and brisk and fundamentally unemotional about evidence and entirely unemotional about people who wanted to argue with the evidence. She ran the hearing the way Harry imagined she ran everything, at efficient pace, with complete clarity about what was relevant and what wasn't, cutting off Dumbledore's legal representative twice in the first 20 minutes for making arguments that were about character rather than fact. "The facts before this court," she said, at the outset, with the voice of someone reading a geological record, "are as follows. 54 enchantments have been forensically identified in the magical signature of Harry James Potter, age 11, student of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, by certified Gringotts cursebreakers operating under the authority of the International Goblin Accords. Of these 54, 23 bear the magical signature of the defendant, Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore. These enchantments include tracking charms, monitoring charms, passive mood modification enchantments, and 2 compulsion charms. The defendant has had access to the victim's trust vault, from which unauthorized withdrawals totaling 20,000 galleons were made over a period of 10 years. This court is here to determine the truth of these allegations and the appropriate response." She looked over her glasses at Dumbledore. "Mr. Dumbledore," she said, "would you like to enter a plea?" Dumbledore looked at the room, looked at it with the full weight of his presence, the blue eyes taking in the tiered seats and the gallery and the journalists and the people who had loved him and the people who had feared him and the people who had come specifically to see this, and then he looked at Harry. Harry looked back. Dumbledore said, "I would like to make a statement." "You'll have that opportunity," Marchbanks said. "After the evidence. Plea first." A long pause. His counsel leaned toward him. Dumbledore waved him slightly aside. "I do not contest the facts," he said. The gallery made a sound. "I contest," he continued, with the measured cadence of someone who had prepared this and was delivering it with precision, "the characterization of my actions as criminal, insofar as every choice I made was made with the intention of protecting Harry Potter and the wizarding world from a threat of unprecedented magnitude. I acknowledge that my methods caused harm I did not intend. I do not acknowledge that harm caused without malicious intent constitutes a crime under the definition this court has applied. Marchbanks looked at him with the expression of someone who has been doing this for 80 years and has heard this argument approximately 700 times in various forms. Noted, she said. Evidence. The evidence took 2 hours. Firebrace presented the forensic findings in a clear, detailed, entirely unarguable format, each charm identified, dated, analyzed for purpose and effect, its caster's signature confirmed. The Gringotts financial record was presented, each unauthorized withdrawal documented with the precision of a century-old banking institution that had been waiting for an opportunity to present this to a legal body and was not going to give anyone the chance to question the methodology. McGonagall testified to the conditions at Privet Drive and her letter of concern in 1981 and the response she'd received. Pomfrey testified to the initial discovery. Firebrace testified to the removal process and its findings, including the soul tether and the sealing charm, both of which caused an extended silence in the courtroom that Marchbanks did not attempt to fill. Then Harry testified. He walked to the chair in the center and sat in it, and the chains lay still, and he looked at the room with the full and uncapped and entirely unmanaged version of himself and felt the room register it, felt the Wisengamot members in their tiered seats feel the quality of what was sitting in front of them. And he spoke clearly and without drama and without performance and entirely without the compulsion charms that had spent 11 years telling him to be small and compliant and easy to manage. He told them what had been done to him. Not all of it, not the conversation with his mother's portrait, not the session with Firebrace, not the internal experience of the sealing charm releasing and the world expanding. He told them the facts, as they related to him directly. What the charms had felt like, once he knew they were there. What the removal had produced. What it had meant to spend 11 years living in a carefully constructed reduction of himself and not knowing it. He told them about the Dursleys. He told them about the self-esteem charm, placed at 15 months, and what the Gringotts report had identified it as, and what that meant for the 10 years that followed. He told them about the 20,000 galleons, which his legal team at Gringotts had confirmed would be returned in full with interest. He told them about the mirror and the stone and quarrel, which was technically a separate case but was so structurally connected to the story of what Dumbledore had been doing that Marchbanks allowed it as context. He did not tell them Dumbledore was evil. He did not tell them what he felt, except in the specific, relevant instances where feelings were evidence. He told them what had been done and what it had cost him, and he let them sit with that without decoration. When he was done, Marchbanks said, "Thank you, Mr. Potter," and he walked back to his seat. Dumbledore's statement came next. Harry listened to it with the same focused attention he'd given everything else this term, and what he found was that it was, genuinely complicated. Dumbledore spoke about Voldemort, about the prophecy, about what he believed was the only path to survival for the magical world, about the specific calculus of choosing to constrain one child's freedom against the potential cost of allowing that child to develop unpredictably in a world where Voldemort might return. He spoke about love, which Harry found both true and infuriating. Dumbledore's love for Harry was real, as far as Harry could tell, and it had produced genuine harm, and the combination of those two things was the specific darkness at the center of what had been done. He spoke about Harry's parents. His voice changed when he spoke about them, became something less managed, and Harry thought that this too was real, that James and Lily Potter had mattered to him, that their deaths had mattered to him, and that none of that had stopped him from treating their son as a resource. He did not apologize. He explained. And the explanation: more actions. AI chat. Are you using your membership to its full potential? Find out. Claude Sonnet 4.